The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
In the Thom Hartmann University Book Club today, we're reading From American Holocaust by David Stannard, The Conquest of the New World. This is from the prologue. Just 21 years after Columbus's first landing in the Caribbean, the vastly populous island that the explorer had renamed Hispaniola was effectively desolate. Nearly 8 million people, those Columbus chose to call Indians, had been killed by violence, disease, and despair. It took a little longer, about the span of a single human generation, but what happened on Hispaniola was the equivalent of more than 50 Hiroshimas, and Hispaniola was only the beginning. Within no more than a handful of generations following their first encounters with Europeans, the vast majority of the Western Hemisphere's native peoples had been exterminated. The pace and magnitude of their obliteration varied from place to place and from time to time, but for years, now historical demographers have been uncovering in region upon region post-Columbia depopulation rates of between 90 and 98%, with such regularity that an overall decline of 95% in Native American population has become a working rule of thumb. What this means is that, on average, for every 20 natives alive at the moment of European contact, when the lands of the Americans teemed with numerous tens of millions of people, only one stood in their place when the bloodbath was over. To put this in a contemporary context, the ratio of native survivorship in the Americas following European contact was less than half of what the human survivorship ratio would be in the United States today if every single white person and every single black person died. The destruction of the Indians of the Americas was far and away the most massive act of genocide in the history of the world. That is why, as one historian aptly has said, far from the heroic and romantic heraldry that customarily is used to symbolize the European settlement of the Americas, the emblem most congruent with reality would be a pyramid of skulls. Scholars estimate the size of the post-Columbian Holocaust have climbed sharply in recent decades. Too often, however, academic discussions of this ghastly event have reduced the devastated indigenous people and their cultures to statistical calculations in reconciling demographic analyses. It was easy for this to happen. From the very beginning, merely taking the account of so mammoth a cataclysm seemed an impossible task, wrote one Spanish adventurer who arrived in the New World only 2 decades after Columbus's first landing, and who himself openly reveled in the torrent of native blood. There was neither, quote, paper nor time enough to tell all that the conquistadors did to ruin the Indians and rob them and destroy the land, end quote. As a result, the very effort to describe the disaster's overwhelming magnitude has tended to obliterate both the writer's and the reader's sense of its truly horrific human element. In an apparent effort to counteract this tendency, one writer, Tsvetsan Todorov, began his study of the events of 1492 and immediately thereafter with an epigraph from Diego de Landa's Relación de las Casas de Yucatán. Quote, the captain, Alonso Lopez de Avila, brother-in-law of the Adelmento de Montejo, captured during the war in Bacalan a young Indian woman of lovely and gracious appearance. She had promised her husband, fearful lest they should kill him in the war, not to have relations with any other man but him, and so no persuasion was sufficient to prevent her from taking her own life to avoid being defiled by another man. And because of this, they had her thrown to the dogs. Toborov then dedicates his book to the memory of a Mayan woman devoured by dogs. It is important to try and hold in mind an image of that woman and her brothers and sisters and the innumerable others who suffered similar fates as one reads Todorov's book, or this one, or any other work on this subject. Just as it is essential, as one reads about the Jewish Holocaust or the horrors of the African slave trade, to keep in mind the treasure of a single life in order to avoid becoming emotionally anesthetized by the sheer force of such overwhelming human evil and destruction. There is, for example, a case of a small Indian boy whose name no one knows today, and whose unmarked skeletal remains are hopelessly intermingled with those of hundreds of anonymous others in a mass grave on the American plains, but a boy who once played on the banks of a quiet creek in eastern Colorado, until the morning in 1864, when the American soldiers came. Then, as one of the cavalrymen later told it, while his compatriots were slaughtering and mutilating the bodies of all the women and all of the children they could catch, he spotted the boy trying to flee. Quote, "There was one child, probably 3 years old, just big enough to walk through the sand. The Indians had gone ahead and this little child was behind following after them. The little fellow was perfectly naked, traveling on the sand. I saw one man get off his horse at a distance of about 75 yards and draw up his rifle and fire, but he missed the child. Another man came up and said, 'Let me try the son of a bitch, I can hit him.' He got down off his horse, kneeled down and fired at the little child, but he missed him too. A third man came up and made a similar remark and fired, and the little fellow dropped." We must do what we can to recapture and try to understand in human terms what it was that was crushed, what it was that was butchered. It is not enough merely to acknowledge that much was lost. So close to total was the human incineration and carnage.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Boy, what a I was going to say 2 days, but it's been about 4 when you include the weekend of the stock market going up and down and up and down. It seems to have stabilized, so I think you could call this a correction. But why did the stock market explode in the first place, and why is it still vulnerable to crashing? We'll get into that a little later on. But I have a question for you. This I find fascinating. Yesterday, Donald Trump said that if a member of Congress doesn't applaud him, they are committing treason. One of the people in the White House with an IQ above room temperature came out this morning, I guess it was, and said, he was just making a joke. Right. I saw it. It didn't look like a joke to me. But, okay, the president calling Democrats traitors. I mean, treason is defined as giving aid and comfort to the enemy. It doesn't even have to be during time of war. Simply, providing aid and comfort to the enemy. And, this, it is yet to be seen, but it sure looks like, at the very least, Don Jr. was desperately trying to work something out with Russia, which raises the question, are they our enemy? And that, that's a whole nother topic, but I think the broad consensus is that at the very least, we have interests that don't go in the same direction. So, does that make Donald Trump, that and all the other stuff he's done, does this make him the worst president ever? Hans Alexander Razzo wrote a fascinating piece for the extranewsfeed.com website, and it's titled, "George W. Bush is the worst president in modern history." Yes, he was way worse than Donald Trump. And I'd like to just put that out there as a question. And, feel free to call in and register your opinion on this. Is Donald Trump a worse president than George W. Bush was? Yes. Now, just to refresh your memory, I mean, it's real, because when George W. Bush left office, he only had a 22% approval rating. That's the lowest in the history of the U.S. presidency during the time when we were doing approval rating polls. I mean, we don't know what, Chester Arthur's rating was or whatever, but we certainly know, going back to the first half of the latter part of the first half of the 20th century, George Bush had a 22% approval rating among everybody. And Bush was one of the most hated Americans. You know, it's just, I mean, this is just a fact. And some of the things that George Bush did, just to refresh your memory again, because it's totally strange that right now, today, when he left office, when George Bush left office, 6% of Democrats said that he was, you know, at least not the worst president ever. Now 51% have a favorable or very favorable view of George Bush. 51% of Democrats. And I want to say, you know, you're forgetting what this guy did. So let's just quickly refresh, you know, go through it, and then we could talk about Trump, and then, you know, we'll take your calls on who was the worst president and why. In fact, in this article, the author says the normalization of characters like George W. Bush will doom the United States political system, which is what we were all, you know, many of us were yelling and screaming at the top of our lungs from 2001 to 2009. Bush started a war against Iraq, a country that did not attack us. Bush lied and implied that Iraq was behind 9/11 to the point that about a little more than half of all Republicans actually at the time of the invasion of Iraq believed that Saddam Hussein was behind 9/11. He then, when it was proven that Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with Iraq, although that story still stuck for the poor, pathetic viewers of Fox so-called news and listeners of right-wing hate radio, who still believe it in many cases, Bush then went to lie number 2, which is, oh, well, you know, maybe they didn't attack us. Maybe Saddam Hussein and Iraq didn't attack us on 9/11, but they're planning to because they've got weapons of mass destruction. This in the face of Scott Ritter and Hans Blix, the two UN weapons inspectors spending 3 or 4 years crisscrossing Iraq, looking in every nook and cranny, even under the bed in Saddam's palace, and they found nothing. There was nothing. There was evidence of a weapons of mass destruction program back in the late 80s when as I recall, when Iraq and Iran were having a hot war, and we were supporting both sides, by the way. We were supplying chemical weapons of mass destruction to Iraq to use against Iranians, and we were providing Iran with satellite maps showing where the Iraqi troops were. And so about 1 million soldiers on both sides were killed, and we thought that was, you know, like some kind of good policy, right? But in any case, back to George Bush. He violated Article 2 of the UN Charter, which says that no country can invade another country without permission of the United Nations or if they haven't been attacked, or unless they've been attacked. In other words, Article 2, Paragraph 4 prohibits preemptive strikes. Bush did a preemptive strike against Iraq. This is also, he also violated Article 8 of the International Criminal Court statutes and the Geneva Conventions, which are called war crimes. This is what we hung Nazis for after World War II, for torturing people. Bush actually, he didn't just torture people, you know, like in Turkey and in black sites in Iraq and you know, other countries. He didn't just torture people there. He brought them here. He built a torture factory in Guantanamo. Now, Trump says he wants to keep it open. So, you know, I mean, this might be a tie. I don't know. But Bush built this torture factory in Guantanamo after torturing people in Iraq. When the pictures got out, it destroyed our reputation around the world. And Republicans continue, in many cases, to defend him on this, which is bizarre. Even David Petraeus, the general who was running our operations in Iraq and Afghanistan, admitted that the U.S. committed war crimes and violated international law. He admitted it. Torture. And then Bush said, oh, no, we never tortured anybody. He lied. He lied to you and me, George W. Bush. Lawrence Wilkerson, who was, you know, Colin Powell's number 2. He was the chief of staff to Colin Powell. Came right out and said most of the detainees in Guantanamo Bay, at Guantanamo Bay, were innocent. That didn't matter to George W. Bush. He wanted, you know, he just wanted to destroy some lives to jack up his popularity with the Republicans. And let us not forget, in the midst of all this war, that the Bush family actually makes money on war. Remember the Carlyle Group, giant investment company that invested in the military-industrial complex? Well, just by coincidence, the head of the Carlyle Group for a while was George Bush Sr., George Bush Jr., an investor. And then you got Bush's deregulations to the financial market, which arguably led right straight to the collapse of 2008. Bush called himself a born-again Christian, so he said, a quote from George W. Bush, "God told me to end the tyranny in Iraq." We got faith-based everything, right? Shoveling money to Jerry Falwell and company. Fighting same-sex marriage. George W. Bush wanted a constitutional ban. He wanted it written into the U.S. Constitution that gay people are second-class citizens and are not entitled to marry, gays and lesbians. Just said no. He cranked the war on drugs massively. He took $1.2 billion and poured it into the war on drugs to imprison more people of color. And he famously said gun control has nothing to do with crime control. So that's George W. Bush. I don't think I need to go through a whole long list of Donald Trump. It's fairly in our face all the time right now. But who do you think is worse? It's an interesting question. George Bush or Donald Trump?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And I think you could claim that we survived Bush. I would say we didn't. I would say the country was permanently damaged. But the question then, will we survive Trump? And welcome back. Mike, watching Free Speech TV in Chicago. Hey, Mike, what's up?
Yeah, hi. I hope you don't mind me rehashing this topic from yesterday, but I've been on hold for 20 hours.
20 hours? I don't think that's even possible,
well, yeah,
Mike.
I was at the end of the show, and you said you didn't have enough time.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. That's okay. Real quick, I just wanted to make a correction. A woman had called in yesterday and said that if the Democrats took over both the House and the Senate, and then they would impeach and convict both Pence and Trump, and then you stated that Ryan would be the next president. Would that be incorrect? Because if they took over the House, there would be a Democratic speaker.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Yeah.
So, I mean, that's
you're very right.
As far as
yeah, I totally blew that one. Thank you for that.
All right. And as far as who's worse than Bush or Trump, I think the poll is reflective of the fact that people see Trump now and they see how bad he is. And in comparison to Bush, Bush looks pretty good.
Well, why? Because he could speak in incoherent sentences most of the time, and he wasn't as bizarre as Trump.
Well, I think that the question should be asked maybe 10 years from now, about Bush and then Trump, because then both of them will have been out of office, and then I think it'll be easier, assuming that we don't have an even worse Republican in office.
The problem with that is you'll have, you'd have to be over 10 years from now, you'd have to be over 40 years old to remember the Bush presidency. So, half our audience won't even know who I'm talking about. I mean, other than history book stuff.
Yeah.
Which is an interesting point because, we're rewriting the history books, or the history books are being written as we speak, and I wonder if the history books are going to show that, George W. Bush was, quote, a good president. I mean, are we going to sanitize and whitewash Bush? Sure seems to be happening to me, Mike.
Yeah, every now and then there's always an article in one of the magazines that are always asking, who was the worst president, and I've seen in a lot of them they very rarely ever attack Reagan.
Yeah.
They'll go after all other types of presidents, and I don't know why. Although I know the subject is between Bush and Trump, but in some ways I have to agree with you in saying that Reagan was really the worst of the bunch.
In terms of lasting damage to the republic, so far, right. I would agree with that. In fact, I'll modify my rant as soon as we're done with this. You and I are done talking. I'll get back to that. But that's a good point. The problem is Reagan was so good at publicity. I mean, he owned the media. He just owned them, and they just swooned for him. And everybody thought that all this conservative stuff, you know, from the war on labor to deregulation to hating government, excuse me, all of that stuff, everybody thought, well, you know, it's not going to be that bad and it's only going to last for a little while. And in fact, he flipped our country upside down and it hasn't returned to where it was since. So.
And right. And as I said, a lot of the people in these polls, when they take them, or I should say the people who respond in the comment section, never realize what Reagan did or never can come to terms with what he did.
Yeah, absolutely right. And again, that's, I mean, in Texas, they've got Ronald Reagan in their history books now. Oh, God. Mike, thanks a lot for the call. We'll be back. I mean, you know, take out Thomas Jefferson, add in, or Abraham Lincoln for that matter, add in Ronald Reagan. Stick around. We'll be right back.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
So I was just informed that there might have been a technical hiccup at the beginning of our show, and you might not have heard my setup for this rant. The question that I'm asking is, who was a worse president, George W. Bush or Donald Trump? And I'd like to toss another one in there, and I think it's probably relevant, and that's Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan had more officials of his administration prosecuted and convicted for corruption than any president in U.S. history. So Reagan's administration was the most corrupt in U.S. history. And, you know, we were going on a pretty good path from 1933 until 1981. We were moving in the direction of workers having more power, workers having more pay, workers having a voice in the workplace. About a third of the workforce in the United States was unionized. And, you know, in any community, if you've got a large union base, that union base sets the wage and benefits floor for non-union employees, which meant that 2/3 of American workers, up until the Reagan era, had the benefits and protections of a union. And even if they didn't have the protections, they had the benefits. You know, it was kind of, you know, it just kind of slopped over. So, and Reagan flipped the entire country upside down. Reagan turned us from a small d democratic, forward-looking country that yeah, the rich were growing in wealth, but actually not as fast as the middle class. The middle class was getting richer faster than the rich, which is fine. I mean, the rich don't need to get that much richer, right? I mean, you got $1 billion. What are you going to do with a second billion? Well, I guess we know the answer to that now. It's by politicians. But, you know, to get a third billion, right? So, which they just handed in, it was just trillions that they handed off. So let me toss Reagan into the mix too. But Bush lied us into a war in Iraq when the war in Iraq was proven to be a lie, you know, on the premise that it had to do with 9/11. When that was proven to be a lie, he said, no, they've got weapons of mass destruction. When that was proven to be a lie, he just said, yeah, you know, tough, we did it. He tortured people. He destroyed the reputation of the United States around the world. He built a special torture facility in Guantanamo Bay, which Donald Trump wants to keep open. So the question, who was the worst president of the United States? Was it George Bush or was it Donald Trump? Who was it? You know, so far, I'm inclined to say Trump, largely because Trump is devastating our federal government. He's taking apart our federal government agencies. But Bush wasn't that much better. And he appointed anti-labor people to the Labor Department, anti-environment people to the EPA and Interior, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's just that they weren't quite as brazen and bizarre about it as Trump. And given the perfidy of the horrors of the lies and everything of the Bush administration, and frankly of the Reagan administration as well, that's a pretty damn low bar to slide under. Is Trump sliding under that? I think that Trump's, even George Bush was not crazy enough to do the kind of war rhetoric. I mean, George Bush actually, I believe, maintained, at least for the first years of his presidency, maintained the Clinton deal with North Korea that if you guys don't build nuclear weapons, we'll continue to support you with a small, modest amount of foreign aid. So, or at least we won't mess with you. So who do you think is the worst president? Fatima in Chicago. Please correct my pronunciation of your name.
Oh, well, I pronounce it Fatima.
Fatima, all the better. Thank you.
Okay. I wanted to, I was listening to you, and then I was thinking Bush or Trump. But then when you cleared it up and like the source of the extra crazy was Reagan. He was the beginning of my adulthood. Well, I was on 10, but he was the worst. So I would say in this comparison, Bush, because he continued a whole lot of Reagan mess, is worse. But the thing about Trump is he's not even smart enough to disguise it. Yeah.
Or he's brave is the wrong word, but brazen enough to proclaim it.
Yeah, yeah.
And that raises another question, Fatima, and that is, with Trump's being basically out about being a bigot, about being a racist, about being a white supremacist, about being a billionaire and sucking up to his billionaire buddies, which is why the billionaire-owned Fox network, is promoting him so heavily. It's become the billionaire network. With Trump being out about all this stuff, does that mean that, while we sort of bought into Reagan's stuff, because we really didn't know where it was going to go, and we pushed back against Bush because we knew that he was lying to us about Iraq and even Afghanistan, frankly, is it possible that now that the lies are so obvious and so widespread, over 2,000 documented lies by the mainstream media, the gentle on president's media, is it possible that Trump is going to undo what Bush and Reagan did by causing Americans to wake up? You think? Fatima? Is it possible? I think we've lost Fatima. No? Okay. I think it might be, but then the question becomes, how much damage is he going to do in the process? Anyhow, back with your calls, your thoughts. Who is the worst president ever after this?
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
The interesting thing about this question is that it gives us an opportunity to really dig into the history, our own history here of what's happened.
It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Medea Benjamin's new book, Kingdom of the Unjust, Behind the U.S.-Saudi Connection. And this is from the introduction. Through the women-led peace organization Code Pink, which I co-founded with Jody Evans after the 9/11 attacks, I have spent much of the last decade standing up against the U.S. military intervention in the Middle East and supporting local democracy activists. I traveled many times to the region, listening to human rights activists, marching with them in the streets, dodging tear gas and bullets, and getting beaten up and deported by government thugs. I have seen firsthand the deadly effects of U.S. foreign policies. The 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq destroyed the lives of millions, including many of my dear friends, and unleashed the sectarian hatred that later gave birth to the Islamic State. I recall a conversation with my Iraqi colleague Yanar Mohammed, daughter of a Shiite father and a Sunni mother,
and founder of the Organization of Women's Freedom in Iraq. When I asked her what was the most notable legacy of the U.S. invasion of her country, she gave the chilling response: "We, Sunnis and Shia, learned to hate each other." In another part of the Middle East, U.S. military support for Israel has wreaked havoc on the lives of Palestinians and aroused the ire of people throughout the region. Continuous U.S. military interventions, from drone warfare in Yemen to overthrowing Muammar Gaddafi in Libya to funneling an endless stream of weapons into the region, have unleashed new levels of violence. But the United States is not the only nation whose massive footprint has been trampling on the lives of people in the Middle East. The other nation is Saudi Arabia, an oppressive monarchy that denies human rights to its own people and exports extremism around the world. It also happens to be the closest U.S. ally in the Arab world. During the 1980s and 1990s, I met intolerant and violent young men in Pakistan and Afghanistan who were trained to hate Westerners in Saudi schools. In 2001, I saw my own nation convulsed by an attack on September 11th that was perpetrated mostly by Saudis. Not hard to connect the dots behind the spread of the Saudi intolerant ideology of Wahhabism, the creation of al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, and the attacks in New York, Paris, Brussels, and San Bernardino. You can also connect the dots between Saudi Arabia and the failure of some of the historic uprisings associated with the Arab Spring, since the Saudi monarchy did not want calls for democracy to threaten its own grip on power. I was in Bahrain after Saudi tanks crushed the inspiring grassroots encampment in Pearl Square, where tens of thousands had gathered day after day to demand democracy. I will never forget the excitement of being in Tahrir Square during the Egyptian Revolution, then watching aghast as a military coup backed by the Saudis put some 40,000 activists behind bars. In Yemen, the Saudis took a direct military role in that nation's internal conflict with a ruthless bombing campaign. When I travel overseas, people often ask me why Saudi Arabia, a country that is so repressive internally and overseas, is such a close ally to the United States. Iranian friends want to know why the U.S. government is so outspoken about human rights violations in Iran, but silent about the worst abuses in the Saudi kingdom. Yemenis want to ask why my government supplies weapons to the very nation, Saudi Arabia, that bombed their schools and hospitals. Saudi women ask why the United States, which professes great democratic values, props up a regime that treats women as second-class citizens. The easy answer is oil, weapon sales, and other business interests. Oil has formed the basis for U.S.-Saudi ties. The kingdom has become the largest purchaser of American weapons in the world, and hundreds of billions of Saudi petrodollars help shore up the U.S. economy. But there's another reason, perhaps more critical than any of the others. The American people have not demanded an end to this dysfunctional, toxic relationship. Why? In part, because the American people know so little about it. Even Americans who consider them parts of a peace movement know virtually nothing about the kingdom. The Saudi press is muzzled, foreign journalists are strictly monitored, and only tourists visiting for religious purposes are allowed into the country. Add to that a Saudi lobby that lines the pockets of U.S. think tanks, such as the Middle East Institute, Ivy League universities, such as Harvard and Yale, and influential institutions from the Clinton Foundation to the Carter Center. This checkbook diplomacy helps put a happy face on the abusive monarchy and silences its critics. So we have a lot to uncover. This book is meant to be a primer, giving readers a basic understanding of how the kingdom holds on to power internally and tries to influence the outside world. It looks at the founding of the Saudi state, the treatment of dissidents, religious minorities, women, and migrant workers, the spread of Wahhabism, the kingdom's relationship with the West, and its role in the region, and what the future might hold. As we delve into the inner workings of this dystopian regime, don't mistake criticism of Saudi Arabia for Islamophobia. This book is not a critique of Islam, but a critique of three intertwining factors that have shaped the Saudi nation: the extremist interpretation of Sunni Islam, known as Wahhabism, the appropriation of the Saudi state by one family, and Western support for this dynasty. Criticizing Saudi Arabia should not be equated with support for Saudi's nemesis, Iran. The Iranian government is guilty of some of the same abuses as the Saudis. The book, Kingdom of the Unjust.
All about the
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I'll get back to your calls about who was the worst president, George W. Bush or Donald Trump, or Ronald Reagan for that matter, in just a moment. But right now on the line with us is Greg Palast, the investigative journalist, author, and filmmaker. The Best Democracy Money Can Buy is his current movie out. It's available all over the place, including Amazon. GregPalast.com is the website, and you can you can tweet him at Greg_Palast, just like Thom_Hartmann. Greg, welcome back to the program. Greg? Greg is talking, but I can't hear him. We got no audio.
Okay, now how's that for you?
There you go. You unmuted your microphone. Thank you, Greg.
All right, Mr. Nunes, stop that.
Yeah, there you go. So the gist of, you and I have been corresponding in email and Twitter and whatnot, and it seems to me that the gist of what you're saying is that if progressives are out there supporting the FBI and Comey and all this kind of stuff, and now we're increasingly learning that had Comey not done his August or October memo, and not publicized that he was reopening the investigation of Clinton because of Weiner, Hillary Clinton would be president right now. It just boils right down to that. That liberals might be kind of walking into a trap of liking people who are actually not all that great.
I'm very concerned. Okay, that progressives are now we're all cheering things like the FISA court, which Ed Snowden is exposed as one of the worst sides of the surveillance state. And for example, the Nunes memo just raises really disturbing problems. And like Mel Goodman, the great whistleblower from the CIA, also said the same thing. And this is very dangerous when we are applauding the surveillance state. Nunes, by the way, who's kind of a nudnik because he actually does exactly what he accuses the FBI of doing. What he said correctly is that the FBI went to this court, the FISA court, and brought down the entire intelligence apparatus on an American citizen based on this file of sludge called the Steele dossier, which is complete garbage, salacious nonsense, unverifiable crap. We don't want that happening to our citizens. What Nunes left out is that it wasn't, he said it should have been revealed that it was paid for by Hillary Clinton. No, Hillary paid for it the second time. The first time was by the Republican, vicious Republican named Paul Singer, otherwise known as the Vulture, a guy we've discussed. I'm very familiar. Now, this is one thing that Singer does all the time, is create these files of sludge on his opponents, whether they're politicians. In this case, he was part of the Never Trump movement. But he also created one, there are other Steele files and by other, with different names. And one is on Greg Palast. So I'm very familiar with these files. And there's one certainly on Thom Hartmann. I mean, we're now getting excited about using our surveillance agencies based on these rumors and sludge and garbage without any revelations to the court what their source are. It's dangerous stuff. And I can tell you that was used against me. And so when, say, oh, well, it's used against Trump, it's okay, but it's going to be used against you, my friend. And when they come for you, they're going to say to you, they're going to quote your own defense of the Gestapo light that we call the FISA court and our new surveillance state.
Yeah. That said, though, Greg, it turns out Carter Page, who was the subject of this surveillance, lived in Russia from 2004 to 2007, as I recall. And in 2013, publicly on television, bragged about the fact that he was an advisor to the Kremlin. What in your mind should it take to provoke, surveillance of an American citizen who might be, dancing to the tune of or actually, supportive of a foreign government?
Well, that's a good question. You were, I just looking at the file on you and RTTV. The same group that's coming down on them. For example, if you look at the great intelligence agency's report that said that Trump is a tool of Russia, and he may be, that I don't know. And by the way, I want to tell you that one thing we shouldn't do, despite the fact that the Nunes memo raised really important civil liberties issues, that doesn't mean that the investigation by Mueller of Trump has no merit. They're trying to take something that's very sideways and is actually a legitimate problem that should be addressed. and they're trying to bootstrap into saying, "Oh, that taints the entire investigation of Trump." It doesn't come close to it.
Yeah.
But let me tell you something from the investigations report of the consensus report of the intelligence agencies. Most of it was about RTTV, and it says I'm reading from their report. It says that it was Russian, that RTTV is messaging Russia's strategic interests because, quote, RT, that's a quote, because RT runs anti-fracking programming, I'm reading from it, highlighting environmental issues and the impacts on public health of fracking. And so if you're against fracking, you are messaging Russia's strategic messages. You're a tool of Putin. And it said that, and not only that, there's some great lines in these reports. I mean,
I got it, Greg. And it's like we've fallen through the rabbit hole. And
Yes.
and I think that's frankly way over the top. And just because, just because my Neo screener just crashed, just because my computer just got invaded, just because I forgot where I was going with that.
Okay,
but
let me just make another point. Okay, I mean they can go after Page, and we can say hooray, but they want the same guys peddling this sludge. Paul the Vulture Singer use it against Greg Palast. They're using the agencies against Thom Hartmann. This is not good stuff. Where we have a secretive star chamber who's going after citizens, and it is dangerous that the FBI, it is absolutely malfeasance by and misconduct. I absolutely agree with Mel Goodman of the CIA, the whistleblower. It's complete misconduct not to say where this sludge came from. Not only that it was paid for by Clinton, but even more important, that it was paid for by Paul the Vulture Singer, who is known to come up with these complete garbage files. And I had to file a libel suit to undo this stuff. But it did have a big effect. They called BBC, who said, we have a file on Greg Palast, the same type of Steele dossier crap from the same guy. And BBC said, well, we don't care because, Palast has a file on you. But it was
by the same guy. You mean Paul Singer paid for it, or Christopher Steele did it?
Paul Singer was paying for guys like Steele and others to create these garbage files.
Yeah. I'm not naive. I have no doubt. When we were doing the big picture in Portland and we moved it to D.C. and RT picked it up, probably Larry King and I are both in somebody's files because we were on RT. Probably a lot of people who are on Al Jazeera are in those files because hey, it's Muslims and Arabs, and probably anybody on China TV, and for that reason in part, and others, I'm no longer there, and I'm glad of it. But just back doing this, but that. That even that doesn't see. I'm not outraged by that. I
am. When you say when the FBI and the CIA together issue a statement saying that if you are part of the anti-fracking movement, you are
we know that's
dangerous, but it's dangerous for another reason. It excuses them surveilling the anti-fracking movement.
No, I got that, and I agree with that, and in fact that. National security was one of the excuses for going against the Dakota Access Pipeline people. The folks who were standing up to the Trans-Canada Pipeline. And
they were messaging Russia.
Not even that. They didn't even have to mention Russia. They just said, "Oh, those Indians, they hate Americans." That was the message that was not just all over Fox News and right-wing hate radio, but was actually being peddled by our government. It was the reason that South Dakota or North Dakota, whichever Dakota it was, brought out the National Guard and started, spraying water on unarmed protesters in 20-degree below zero weather. It was a terrible thing, and I agree with you on that. I'm not going to debate you on this, Greg, but I think that your voice is an important voice, and I listen to you when you speak, and.
I just want us to be careful, Tom.
Yeah.
Before we start applauding the FBI and applauding the CIA and applauding the FISA court, this secret court, which, for example, one of their subpoenas asked for every phone call ever made by or through the Verizon system.
Yeah.
We got that from Ed Snowden. This secretive police state that we have created doesn't become wonderful because they've gone after a couple of our enemies.
Yeah.
Paul Singer and the Steele dossier should never be used against an American citizen. And the FBI and CIA should have said, This was paid for by Clinton. This was paid for
But there's
by
a fundamental
Singer,
fallacy in that argument, Greg, and that is the argument that you're making is the argument that the Republicans are trying to make, that Devin Nunes tried to make, which is that the Steele dossier was the reason why the FISA court went after Carter Page. And in fact, the reason why this was not the first time Carter Page had been under surveillance.
Oh, no, don't misunderstand me. I've said that, like, this doesn't taint the Russian investigation by itself. There is absolute misconduct by the CIA and FBI. They should have revealed this information. Does that mean that Carter Page isn't a legitimate target of investigation? That I don't know, because, by the way, we don't know what's in the rest of that file. We don't know what else they lied about. By the way, and they also used the FBI misconduct went to saying, well, the Steele dossier, even if you think it's phony, there are two independent sources, Mother Jones and Huffington Post, which back it up. And it turns out that that was just crud dropped on them by Paul Singer from the Steele file. And they were bootstrapping their own argument. This is misconduct by our own police agencies.
Yeah.
I don't like it.
Got it. Yeah,
I'm
wary of it too. Greg Palast, gregpalast.com is the website. Greg, thanks for dropping by today.
You're the best, Tom.
Yeah, well, you're a voice of reason and sanity. I appreciate it. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back with your calls. Who is the worst president? After this. And welcome back. Joy, watching Free Speech TV in Hornbrook, California. Hey, Joy, what's on your mind?
Hi. I was thinking about just this topic this morning when I was laying in bed before I got up, and I almost want to say drop the mic, because almost everything I've thought about, you and some of your listeners, other listeners have said, but there's one more thing that makes Reagan the worst, and that's the insidiousness of his reputation, our Saint Reagan thing. You talked about his good PR and everything like that, but we have a Republican saint here. And, guys like Ryan and Nunes, and these guys grew up genuflecting to Saint Reagan. And because of that, our conversation has moved so far over. We're actually looking at, like Greg Palast said, FBI agents as like somehow, they're being demeaned for doing their job. I mean, hello. I just find it just incredibly disconcerting that so much of what's wrong with our society now started with Reagan. And, I'm surrounded by people who think he's wonderful. And sometimes I even go back to Reagan just to make the point, at least Reagan was here, he was, not this far over. So I think I find it insidious, and that's the word that was on my tongue today.
So we have three Republican presidents in a row. I think we can pull George Herbert Walker Bush. He was pretty bad, and he did the first Iraq War, which was arguably the origin of everything, including 9/11. But we have three Republican presidents that have just, once Reagan set the course, Bush and Trump pushed it farther and farther and farther in the direction that Reagan started, which is toward the fascist right, the far right, the arguably white supremacist Nazi right.
Absolutely.
And Joy, I don't know if you're familiar, there was this thing that came after the Reagan presidency, that a couple of billionaires funded this program called the Reagan Legacy Project. And their goal was to have a statue to Reagan or a building named after Reagan in every single county in the United States and in every country in the world. And there's like, I think, over 1,000 counties in the United States, and there's, over 200 countries in the world. And they've accomplished it. They've done it. The Reagan Legacy Project was successful. They were trying to turn, like after World War II, we put FDR on the dime and we put him on Mount Rushmore, as I recall. FDR's on Mount Rushmore, right?
No, it's Teddy.
Oh, it's Teddy. You're right. I'm sorry. Okay, but we put him on the dime, and everybody agreed, hey, yeah, Roosevelt is wonderful. And the Republicans thought, okay, we're going to turn Ronnie Reagan into our version of FDR. And they've been successful.
I know. It's almost like if there's a Martin Luther King honor somewhere right around the corner, there's got to be a Reagan.
Yeah. Yeah, Reagan, who hated King and everything he stood for. Joy, thank you for the call.
One other thing, I just wanted to say, the most dangerous president, because he's not in the past and because he is what he is Trump. Most dangerous.
Right, I agree. Joy, you can hear the music, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Joy, thanks for the call. I appreciate it. And thanks for watching Free Speech TV. We'll be right back.
Bye.
Hi, I'm Heather with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving of donations, volunteering, or even spreading the word, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to sustain for more than 20 years. Now, you can give to Free Speech TV through the Branch of Gratitude. This program is a sustainable way to give that reduces waste through paper mailing, postage, and staff hours. By choosing to participate in the Branch of Gratitude, you are joining hands with the socially conscious community and sending a message to the world that Free Speech TV is not only here to stay, it is here to thrive. Please call 877-378-8669 or go online to freespeech.org. Make a difference and join the Branch of Gratitude today.
Okay, who was the worst president? We've added Reagan to the mix. Was it Trump? Was it Bush? Was it Reagan? And what does this mean for the fate and future of our republic? And let us remember, by the way, that neither Bush nor Trump were elected with a majority of the votes. Both of them were put into office by the racist leftover from slavery of the Electoral College. And let us also remember that Ronald Reagan would not have been president had he not conspired with the Iranians to hold the U.S. hostages for a full year, thus devastating Jimmy Carter's reputation. So, just think how different history would have been if Nixon hadn't committed treason by blowing up LBJ's peace deal with the Vietnamese, if Reagan hadn't committed treason by conspiring with Iran to hold the hostages, and the whole Iran-Contra thing. And if we didn't have the Electoral College, so Al Gore he got 500,000 more votes than George W. Bush. Al Gore had been president. And Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Donald Trump. I mean, here you have the four most consequential Republican presidents of my lifetime. Well, I'd say Eisenhower was actually the most consequential, but he was relatively speaking, a good guy. But here you have four presidents who either committed treason to gain office or simply didn't win the election, which is pretty damn bizarre when you think about it. Anyhow, Alex in Edison, New Jersey, your thoughts on this?
Well, I look at it like this. If you give each of those presidents...
I can't hear you, Alex.
Hi, is that better?
Yeah, can you turn him up, Arthur? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, I look at it like this. If you give each president one extra term, how bad would the country be? And without going through my long analysis, I would say George Bush was the worst. He wouldn't have managed the financial crisis. He wouldn't have managed Hurricane Sandy. I don't know.
Yeah, so your vote is for George W. Bush. I think that if he had had another term, we probably would have had a Great Depression. Because his policies were not that different from Hoover. And Herbert Hoover's, who had the market crash in '29 and then just basically did nothing all through the rest of 1929, all through 1930, all through 1931, all through 1932, and for the first 3 months of 1933. And in the process, a third of America was unemployed, and the country was devastated. Interesting. Thank you, Alex. John in John in Philadelphia. Hey, John, your thoughts?
So my one thought here is we're just over a year into the Trump presidency, and we're comparing it. So, that's and I'm going to still say Trump, just to put that into perspective. One thing I did want to point out: did the Joint Chiefs of Staff clap at the State of the Union? Mm-hmm. They did?
Oh, I don't believe so. I mean, traditionally, the Joint Chiefs and the Supreme Court don't applaud. They're supposed to be neutral, and so they don't. But frankly, I don't know if they applauded or not. I wasn't watching, or at least I wasn't watching the Joint Chiefs.
I don't believe they did either. Just to kind of point his own words back to himself.
Oh yeah, is John Roberts a traitor? Is
because he didn't clap?
Yeah, right, exactly.
That's our new definition, because you brought out the aiding the enemy.
Right.
I'd argue that the whole 9/11 thing had a lot of Saudi backing. Mm-hmm. Is he aiding the enemy by giving them this big weapons package?
Well, and George W. Bush was in the pocket of the Saudis. He Bandar Bush, his best friend, kissing him on the lips. I mean, it was whoa. But here's the thing, John, about Trump. So far, much of what Trump has done, which has outraged many of us, rolling things back regulatorily and legislatively, for that matter, has been undoing things that Barack Obama did in response to, Obama tried to fix the damage of George W. Bush, and Trump is undoing Obama. So I don't think that we're yet to the point where it's worse than it was under George W. Bush. It's just we all, the new normal was Barack Obama making the country, kind of work. And so anyway, John, thanks for the call. Well said. Jim in Martinsburg, West Virginia. Hey, Jim, what's up?
Hi,
Your thoughts?
sir. Reagan first, but caveat. Bush put us into two wars, neither of which I think we should have been in.
Yep.
One was clearly illegal. The loss of life and treasure, the loss of our respect around the globe. Basically, a neophyte didn't know anything about foreign policy at all. Couldn't even name. Couldn't spell. Couldn't name foreign leaders. I don't think he ever left the United States prior to being president. He basically left Cheney and the others in his administration to exercise whatever they wanted to do. And I think that he got all his information from them, and that's the problem. I think you actually, the previous caller said potential over actual. I think is what Trump may end up being the worst.
Yeah, especially if he provokes a nuclear war with North Korea,
exactly.
or even a conventional war with Iran. I mean, the possibilities are mind-boggling. Jim, thanks for the call. It's a good vote. So just actually, let me get Tamara in here. Tamara, you want to? We have 20 seconds. Quick vote here.
I think your question's a bit of a straw man, because while it began with Reagan, ultimately it's the Republican Party who used their president as puppets. They were told what to do by the Republicans.
Sorry, Tamara, we just hit the break. We'll be back.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com.
Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com.
Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242
or visit tomsbeets.com.
Today we're reading from Requiem for the American Dream, The 10 Principles of Concentration of Wealth and Power by Noam Chomsky. Brand new book. From the preface, a note on the American Dream. During the Great Depression, which I'm old enough to remember, it was bad, much worse objectively than today. But there was a sense that we'll get out of this somehow, an expectation that things are going to get better. Maybe we don't have jobs today, but they'll be coming back tomorrow and we can work together for a brighter future. This was a time of a lot of political radicalism that would hopefully lead to a different future, one with more justice, equality, and freedom. Breaking down repressive class structures, and so on. There was just a general sense that this will work out somehow. Most of my family, for instance, were unemployed working class. The rise of the union movement itself was a reflection of, and a source of, optimism and hopefulness. And that's missing today. Today there's a general feeling that nothing's coming back. It's over. The American dream, like most dreams, has large elements of myth to it. Part of the 19th century dream was the Horatio Alger story. We're dirt poor, but we're going to work hard and we'll find a way out of it, which was true to an extent. Take my father, who came in 1913 from a very poor village in Eastern Europe. He was able to get a job in a sweatshop in Baltimore and gradually work himself up to the point where he could go to college, get a degree, and finally even a PhD. He ended up living what's called a middle-class lifestyle. A lot of people could do that. It was possible for immigrants from Europe in the early days to achieve a level of wealth, privilege, freedom, and independence that wouldn't have been imaginable in their countries of origin. But now we simply know that that's not true anymore. Social mobility, in fact, is lower here than it is in Europe. But the dream persists, fostered by propaganda. You hear it in every political speech. Vote for me, you'll get the dream back. They all reiterate it in similar words. You even hear it from people who are destroying the dream, whether they know it or not. But the dream has to be sustained. Otherwise, how are you going to get people in the richest, most powerful country in world history with extraordinary advantages to face the reality that they see around them? Inequality is really unprecedented. If you look at total inequality now, it's like the worst periods of American history. But if you refine it more closely, the inequality comes from the extreme wealth in a tiny sector of the population, a fraction of the 1%. There were periods like the Gilded Age in the 1890s and the Roaring '20s and so on, when a situation developed rather similar to this. But the current period is extreme. Because if you look at the wealth distribution, the inequality comes mostly from super wealthy. Literally, the top 0.1% are just super wealthy. This is the result of over 30 years of a shift in social and economic policy. If you check, you find that over the course of these years, the government policy has been modified completely against the will of the population to provide enormous benefits to the very rich. And for most of the population, the majority, real incomes have almost stagnated for over 30 years. The middle class, in that sense, that unique American sense, is under severe attack. A significant part of the American dream is class mobility. You're born poor, you work hard, you get rich. The idea that it's possible for everyone to get a decent job, buy a home, get a car before their children go to school, and have their children go to school, it's all collapsed. Take a look at American society. Imagine yourself looking down from Mars. What do you see? In the United States, there are professed values like democracy. In a democracy, public opinion is going to have some influence on policy, and then the government carries out actions determined by the population. That's what democracy means. It's important to understand that privileged and powerful sectors have never liked democracy, and for very good reasons. Democracy puts power into the hands of the general population and takes it away from the privileged and powerful. It's a principle of concentration of wealth and power. Concentration of wealth yields concentration of power, particularly so at the cost of, as the cost of elections skyrockets, which forces the political parties even more deeply into the pockets of major corporations. This political power quickly translates into legislation that then increases the concentration of wealth. So fiscal policy, like tax policy, deregulation, rules of corporate governance, and a whole variety of measures, political measures designed to increase the concentration of wealth and power, yields more political power to do the same thing. And that's what we've been seeing. So we have this kind of vicious cycle in progress. I mean, the wealthy always did have an inordinate amount of control over policy. Actually, that goes back centuries. It's so traditional that it was described by Adam Smith in 1776. You read the famous Wealth of Nations. He says in England, quote, "The principal architects of policy are the people who own the society." In his day, in Adam Smith's day, merchants and manufacturers. And they make sure that their own interests are very well cared for, however grievous the impact on the people of England or others. Now, it's not merchants and manufacturers, it's financial institutions and multinational corporations. The people who Adam Smith called the masters of mankind, and they're following the vile maxim, all for ourselves and nothing for anyone else. They're just going to pursue policies that benefit them and harm everyone else. Well, that's a pretty general maxim of politics that's been studied closely in the United States. Those are the policies that have increasingly been followed. And in the absence of a general popular reaction, that's pretty much what you'd expect. Then we get into principle number 1, reduce democracy. And, he goes through his 10 principles. The book, Requiem for the American Dream.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. I have talked many times about how the GOP tax scam is increasing the fragility of our financial markets. And the reason why, of course, is because the federal government now has to borrow $1.5 trillion and then give that money to the billionaire class. And that's not just going to cost us $1.5 billion, which is going to come out of your and my taxes. Because we didn't get this giant tax break that the billionaires got. It's also, coming out of the economy as a whole to a certain extent. And this whole thing, we are such a debt-rich economy. There's so much debt right now that, you can thank the GOP for your 401k losses, I guess, is the bottom line of what I'm saying here. Michael in Bowden, Georgia. People want to weigh in on who is the worst president ever, so let's get back to it. What do you think, Michael?
Well, I think every president we've had since George Washington has been a bad president.
Everyone?
Everyone. Every one of them. Reason being, this is my opinion, if you are blinded by the fact the president runs the country and handles everything and makes all the decisions, you're blind. Get involved in your state, your local elections, elect people on local levels, start working in your neighborhood, go to your city, go to your state, and then work your way up.
Yeah,
any president we've ever had can't do anything without Congress and Senate's approval.
Yes, excellent point. I thought you were making the opposite point a second ago, and I was going to argue it with you. But yes, excellent point. And this is, if we want to correct this, if we want to extract this cancer, the only way to do it is for us to get involved in politics and to support politicians who are genuinely progressive, who actually want to make America, a functional country once again. Michael, thank you for the call. Well said. Brent in Hilliard, Ohio. Hey, Brent, what's on your mind? What's your vote for the worst president?
My vote is for Ronald Reagan. Mm-hmm. And despite the fact that I dislike a blanketly dislike his policies, I feel like, or nearly blanketly. That's not really the reason. The biggest reason I think he's the worst and he stands out is I think he's the first time that we elected a TV star. Like we began to like in the Republican primary, he ran against a legitimate, seasoned candidate in George Herbert Walker Bush,
right.
And we disregarded
and former CIA director, right?
Yeah, well, also true. But I mean, like we just normalized that someone who is famous could somehow take this responsibility. I know that he was governor of California, which gives him some credibility, but he certainly didn't work his way through the ranks. His television performance allowed him to be exempt from the requirements that most other politicians would have to be seasoned and have some.
Yeah, and I think you could make the argument that precedent paved the way for reality TV show star Donald Trump to run for president himself.
100% agree.
Yeah, well said. Brent, thank you for the call. Alfred in Bray, California. Hey, Alfred, who was the worst president?
George W. Bush. I just want to thank you so much for your show and your guests. I learned so much. And for your callers. Also, I want to keep it short. I'm so glad you brought up this topic, but George Bush did so much damage, and his reaction to the 9/11 attack, his refusal to allow a investigation until he was able to set it up in a way that really we didn't get to the bottom of it. So basically, I know there's a lot of other calls, so thank you so much for your show. I love your show. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Alfred. I think essentially, you know, Ronald Reagan didn't destroy our reputation internationally, largely because his treason, you know, the deal he cut with Iran was not publicized until years after he was out of office. George W. Bush actually destroyed our reputation internationally. Reagan simply destroyed the working class. But, I get your point. Very well said. Alfred, thank you. Dave in Federal Way, Washington, your vote?
Yeah, to me, it's hands down Donald Trump, because a president is more than just one person. All right, I compare him to Andrew Johnson. Our system is strong enough, I think, to endure a very incompetent, inept president. But when that individual has followers, that's where we have a problem.
But Johnson wasn't inept. He was just on the wrong side of history. I mean, when Lincoln was dead, Johnson wanted to basically bring back slavery, or at least bring back the closest thing he could get to that, which was, kicking off the whole Jim Crow era.
Yeah, but you nailed it when you said wrong side of history. I think Trump's going to show that he is on the wrong side of history. Like, for example, I'll just use the East Jerusalem move of the embassy in recognition as Jerusalem as the capital. Palestine, like the Confederacy, cannot exist as an independent country, but it's going to now, regardless. Now, the question is who's going to be its benefactor? Who is going to make it manifest? Like the Confederacy sought out, England and other foreign allies to help them. Palestine will more than likely evolve into the orbit of Russia or China. And these are serious enemies. And George Bush started all this. George Bush's speech about how he wasn't a bigot, I don't know if you recall that speech he just gave, how, bigotry is wrong. I think George Bush was trying to absolve himself from the historic record. He's trying to say that, he's hoping that history will remind him of having nothing to do with bigotry. I think Trump is just the result of Bush.
Yeah, excellent point. And Reagan, I would add, my point earlier, reality, TV star presidents is like, Trump's the latest iteration of it. Well said, Dave. Thanks for the call. Johnny in Lamarck, Texas. Johnny, your vote?
Well, I would say Reagan, but Trump probably will trump him when Pence takes over his place. But let me add a caveat to this all. If we consider Nixon and his people, if they had not sabotaged the peace negotiations with the Vietnamese, because LBJ administration would have told them, hey, quit that or we'll prosecute you, then that would have given Reagan and his people pause to not do what they ultimately did. Or, likewise, if the Democrats in the Obama administration had not talked about looking forward. Remember, looking forward. Let's look forward. Let's not look back. Let's not criminally prosecute.
Which was absurd.
War crimes from other administrations.
It was just absurd what Obama did with regard to that, and what Jerry Ford did with Nixon, pardoning Nixon.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you. I just interrupted you, Johnny. I'm sorry. Okay. Go ahead.
So I'm saying, if the Obama administration had done what it's supposed to have done, it had the mandate to criminally prosecute certain Bush administration officials, then do you think the Republicans and Trump would have been so brazen as to behave the way they did? Probably Trump would have never even considered running.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Johnny. And this started with Jerry Ford pardoning Nixon, in my opinion, and that was a huge mistake. Nixon should have, at the least, there should have been a judicial process. Even if he didn't end up in jail, everything should have been laid out for everybody to see. I'm with you. Johnny, thanks for the call. Cheryl in Wilsonville, Oregon. Your vote? Cheryl?
Yeah.
I can't hear you, Cheryl.
Okay, just go ahead then.
Okay, thank you. I could hear that, but it sounds like you're in the bottom of a tin can. Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. Hey, Norma, your vote?
Well, I think Trump will be the most dangerous to us, but also, like you said, Nixon. When you think about Nixon putting Lewis Powell and Rehnquist on the Supreme Court and the effect they've had through the years, and then you have George H.W. Bush with Kuwait, and you can throw Clinton in there, too, with his permanent trade relations with China, and that has destroyed private business in the United States. So it's like a long list of how do you decide which is the worst? Well,
in part, that's because, Clinton continued Reagan's trade policies and amplified them with NAFTA and everything else. Yeah. But see, I don't think that Clinton did damage to the country. He damaged our trade deal, absolutely. But anyhow, Norma, thank you.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I'll cut Bill Clinton a little bit of slack, but, particularly when compared to Trump. Oh, my God. We'll be back. And welcome back. Judd in Newark, New Jersey, your vote?
Hi, my vote is the current president, by virtue of the fact that he actually exists in a line of commonality with the prominence of time, in the prominence of the present tense. All the others are less worth. If we go back to Bush, he was worse in the context of the present tense. So, but getting all the way back, I think this negative power of deregulation by these people has an effect that we're dealing with a liberty from justice. And that's my opinion, is that liberty from justice is freedom for legalized crime. So basically, I think the worst is in our present tense, and as it goes along in the stream of time, it will always be the worst.
Yeah.
In any case, that's my case.
Okay, Judd, good one. Thank you. Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, your vote?
Well, I don't think you're being fair to Mr. Trump, because you're comparing 8 years of, I would say, incompetence, low IQ, and corporate servitude to 1 year of greed, racism, and evil.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. If we're comparing Donald Trump right now after 1 year to 8 years of Reagan and 8 years of Bush, then
how bad is Trump?
Right. Yeah, he's got to be 8 times worse, right? If we're having this conversation today instead of 7 years from now, that's a good one.
I'll put forth that if he goes 4 years, he'll probably do more harm to this country than any of those other presidents mentioned, and I don't like any of them.
Yeah, I think you may well be right, Mark, but I'm gonna let everybody weigh in here before I draw any conclusions. Thank you. Tony in Sun City, Arizona. Tony, your vote?
You bet. I think first let me say that there was Abraham Lincoln, and then there was Ike Eisenhower, and other than that, all of the Republican presidents have been sad news.
Well, Teddy Roosevelt wasn't a disaster.
Yeah, he was okay. Yeah, I'll say that. He was really a liberal.
He was a progressive. Republican. He called himself a progressive.
However, I think they've gotten worse ever since Reagan. With each one of them that succeeded Reagan has been worse than the last one. And I think it's going to continue that way until they realize that the hypocrites and the money changers have taken over the Republican Party.
Mm.
And if you remember your Christian doctrine, Jesus Christ condemned the hypocrites and the money changers, who were in fact the oligarchs of the time, and the scribes and Pharisees were the moral authorities of the time. And those were respectively referred to by Jesus as the hypocrites and the money changers.
Right, right. The Jerry Falwells of their day, as it were. Although they actually had power. I mean, they had the power of the state behind them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, interesting.
That's my opinion, and you're welcome to it.
Okay, thank you, Tony. I got it. I appreciate the call. Thanks for watching Free Speech TV there at Sun City. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Kevin in Morgantown, West Virginia. Kevin, your thoughts on who is our worst president or is our worst president?
Ronald Reagan. I'm a union carpenter. I've been in the union for 39 years. When he fired them 10,000 air traffic controllers and nobody did a damn finger to help them guys, that's when things started going downhill.
Yeah, I agree.
And they've been going downhill ever since.
Yeah, Reagan.
And I watch you and Bill Press every day, and not a damn thing has been said about Don Blankenship just got out of prison, and he's got a website set up already, running for the U.S. Senate.
That's amazing.
For West Virginia.
That's amazing. You think he's going to, you live in West Virginia, you think he's going to win?
He'll win. Yeah. Believe it or not, the people of this state are stupid enough to put him in office.
Well,
he's responsible for 29 coal miners getting killed.
Is it
down there at Sago Mining?
Yeah. Is it that you think West Virginians are stupid enough, or misinformed, or malinformed?
They're
enough?
Misinformed.
Yeah.
This is a red state. Don't be fooled by Joe Manchin. He's a Republican.
Yeah.
He's always been a blue dog. He's come to our union meetings begging for money. 2 times we refused to give him any money at all for his campaign.
Interesting.
Because he treated his workers so bad in his coal mines.
Yeah. Okay. Kevin, thank you for the call from Morgantown, West Virginia. Frank in Caldwell, Idaho. Your thoughts on who is the worst president?
LBJ and Obama.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Well, LBJ, because he put the government supporting the people and now they don't have to support themselves. They can just go on welfare and live their whole life. And Obama, because he weaponized the intelligence services, the Justice Department, FBI, State Department, against Americans.
Well, that was done by George W. Bush. Obama just didn't roll it back. And your argument...
Obama used the FBI and the Justice Department to attack Trump. And it was like, you don't see that except in the South American countries.
Yeah, I don't think that happened, Frank. I think that you could argue, if you want, that Jim Comey and Mr. McCabe coming out with their memo about Hillary Clinton weeks before the election flipped the election in favor of Trump. But I don't see the other argument you're making there.
Yeah, but the other argument is they're spying on Trump illegally. They made up this document called the FISA deal, took it to the court, lied to the court, and then took it and used it against Trump.
Actually, none of what you just said is true.
Okay. Anyway,
no, I'm serious. I'm serious, Frank. None of what you just said is true. Where did you learn that? Who told you that? Who's the person who fooled you on this stuff?
fooled me. I wasn't fooled. I can see it on what's going on on the news, on any channel. Any channel you go to, it's always the FBI against Trump. It's the mainstream media against Trump. It's all propaganda, and it's ran out of the State Department. And
How often every day, Frank, do you watch Fox News?
I watch it, and also watch MSNBC and CNN. Now let me get.
So
to
just a little bit of Fox
LBJ.
News does this to a person.
No, it ain't got nothing to do. It's reality. Anyway,
see.
LBJ, because he decided to put the government intrusively into people's lives, forced busing.
You're talking. Well, no, the forced busing was happening under Eisenhower and Nixon and John Kennedy. LBJ did Medicare, Medicaid, and support to schools. LBJ lifted. It cut our poverty rate in half over a decade with the Great Society.
This country's not sponsored.
So you're opposed to Medicaid and Medicare. How do you get your medical care, Frank?
Hey, what I'm saying is I don't believe the government should be intrusive because of LBJ. He decided to give everybody welfare for life, health care for life, and all that other garbage.
So is it okay with you, Frank? You're if you're an average taxpayer, and I have no idea what your circumstances are, but just to play pretend here, let's say that you're making $45,000 a year, kind of in the median, right there in the middle. Then if you're doing that, then you're paying about $2,400 a year to corporate welfare, to support big corporations, and you're paying about $60 a year to support human beings, pregnant women and disabled people, and you think that we should cut out that $60 a year and just do away with it, but continue the $2,400 a year that you're using to support, Koch Industries and Microsoft?
How am I supporting Koch Industries?
Well, they get huge subsidies. You've got, it's an oil company. You got the oil depletion allowances. We subsidize the oil industry to the tune of about $5 billion a year, and not only that, actually, it's greater worldwide. It's several $trillion a year, and we support all kinds of businesses. I mean, it's just corporate welfare is massive. And
how much money do we waste supporting the illegals?
Here, I don't know, but here's the thing: we spend out of your tax dollars. Here's the amounts. This is from the Cato Institute, right, which was originally called the Charles Koch Foundation. So this is the Koch brothers Institute, the Cato Institute, libertarian think tank. Now, the Cato Institute estimates that the federal government spends $100 billion a year on corporate welfare. That's an average of $870 for each of America's 115 families. And then here, this is another one. They also estimate that $696 out of your paycheck every year, $870 out of your paycheck goes to direct subsidies and grants. Then they get what are called business incentives, which is where this is $80 billion a year. $696 for every U.S. family. This is where they give tax abatements. They say to Walmart, hey, come on into our community. We'll suspend your property taxes for 20 years. That's welfare. And then corporate tax subsidies, that's over $100 billion a year. That's $870 per family. So in total, if you're an average taxpayer, you are paying $2,436 a year to companies that are already insanely profitable. Frank, I really strongly suggest you get a news source for news, because you're not well served by whoever you're listening to. I realize you called into our program, but I suspect that that's the exception rather than the rule in terms of your media consumption habits. We're coming up on the bottom of the hour here, and our lines are just totally slammed. People really want to talk about this, and it's a great stepping off point for all kinds of nuance and other conversations. So stick around. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Worst president, at least in our lifetimes, was it Lyndon Johnson? Well, Vietnam War was pretty bad. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study by Stefano Harney and Fred Moten. This is from the introduction. It starts with love, exchange, fellowship. It ends as it begins, in motion, in between various modes of being and belonging.
and on the way to new economies of giving, taking, being with, and for. And it ends with a ride in a Buick Skylark on a way to another place altogether. Surprising, perhaps, after we have engaged dispossession, debt, dislocation, and violence, but not surprising when you have understood that the projects of fugitive planning and black study are mostly about reaching out to find connection. They are about making common cause with the brokenness of being. A brokenness, I would venture to say, that is also blackness, that remains blackness, and will, despite all, remain broken, because this book is not a prescription for repair. If we do not seek to fix what has been broken, then what? How do we resolve to live with brokenness, with being broke, which is also what Moten and Harney called debt? Well, given that debt is sometimes a history of giving, at other times a history of taking, at all times a history of capitalism, and given that debt also signifies a promise of ownership but never delivers on that promise, we have to understand that debt is something that cannot be paid off. Debt, as Harney puts it, presumes a kind of individualized realization to a naturalized economy that is predicated upon exploitation. Can we have, he asks, another sense of what is owed that does not presume a nexus of activities like recognition and acknowledgement, payment and gratitude? Can debt become a principle of elaboration? Moten links economic debt to the brokenness of being in the interview with Stefan Shukatis, who he acknowledges that some debts should be paid and that much is owed, especially to black people, by white people. And yet he says, I also know that it is, that what it is that is supposed to be repaired is irreparable. It can't be repaired. The only thing we can do is tear this stuff down completely and build something new, end of quote. The undercommons do not come to pay their debts, to repair what has been broken, to fix what has been undone. If you want to know what the undercommons wants, what Moten and Harney want, what black people, indigenous people, queers, and poor people want, what we, the we who cohabit in the space of the undercommons, want, it is this. We cannot be satisfied with the recognition and acknowledgement generated by the very system that denies A, that anything was ever broken, and B, that we deserve to be the broken part. So we refuse to ask for recognition, and instead we want to take apart, dismantle, tear down that structure right now. That right now limits our ability to find each other, to see beyond it, and to access the places that we know live outside its walls. We cannot say what new structures will replace the ones we live with yet, because once we have torn stuff down, we will inevitably see more and see differently and feel a new sense of wanting and being and becoming. What we want after the break will be different from what we think we want before the break, and both are necessarily different from the desires that issue from being in the dark. Let's come at this by another path. In the melancholic and visionary 2009 film version of Maurice Sendak's Where the Wild Things Are, 1963, Max, the small seeker who leaves his room, his home, his family to find the world beyond, finds a world of lost and lonely beasts, and they promptly make him their king. Max is the first king the wild things have had, whom they did not eat, and who did not, in turn, try to eat them. And the beasts are the first grown things that Max has met, who want his opinion, his judgment, and his rule. Max's power is that he is small while they are big. He promises the beasts that he has no plans to eat them, and that this is more than anyone has ever promised them. He promises them that he will find ways through and around and will slip through the cracks and re-crack the cracks if they fill up. He promises to keep sadness at bay and to make the world with the wild creatures that roared their terrible roars and gnashed their terrible teeth and rolled their terrible eyes and showed their terrible claws. That Max fails to make the wild things happy or to save them or to make the world with them is less important than the fact that he found them and he recognized in them the end of something and potentially the path to an alternative in his world, or an alternative to his world, excuse me. The wild things were not the utopian creatures of fairy tales. They were the rejected and lost subjects of the world Max had left behind. And because he shuttles between the Oedipal land where his mother rules and the ruined world of the wild, he knows the parameters of the real. He sees what is included and what is left out. And he is now able to set sail for another place, a place that is neither the home he left nor the home to which he wants to return. Moten and Harney want to gesture to another place, a wild place that is not simply the leftover space that limbs real and regulated zones of polite society. Rather, it is a wild place that continuously produces its own unregulated wilderness. The zone we enter through Moton and Harney is ongoing and exists in the present, and as Harney puts it, some kind of demand is already being enacted, fulfilled in the call itself. While describing the riots of London in 2011, Harney suggests that the riots and insurrections do not separate out the request, the demand, and the call. Rather, they enact the one in the other. The book is The Undercommons, Fugitive Planning and Black Study.
/podcast. They're commercial free and you can listen anytime, any place you want.
Hey, let's check in for a geeky science alert here. Welcome back to the program. This is your geeky science. Where did geeky science go? There it is. Yes, indeed. It's our geeky science alert for the day. This is your brain on cheese. This is by Michael Pellman Rowland, and this is from Forbes magazine. Cheese is one of the hardest habits to regulate day to day. In fact, you may be hooked on cheese. This is why so many people choose to be vegetarians rather than vegans so they can keep eating cheese. Now, why is it that you could be hooked? Well, it turns out that evolution wants babies to nurse, right? It's good for them. And if you ever looked at a nursing baby, they're almost always smiling. Oh, this feels good. And it has to do with they're getting a substance that hits the opiate receptors in your body. Yep, same thing as heroin. This is Dr. Neil Bernard, author of The Cheese Trap. These opiates attach to the same brain receptors that heroin and morphine attach to. They're not strong enough to get you arrested, but they are just strong enough to keep you coming back for more, even while your thighs are expanding before your very eyes. And the specifics of this, the detail, cheese contains the principal protein in cheese is called casein. It's also in milk, but it's 1/7 as much in milk. And casein has fragments called casomorphins. Yes, morphins, like morphine. And these fragments attach to the same brain receptors as I mentioned. Researchers believe this occurs as a way to ensure babies, humans, cows, etc., continuing to nurse during infancy, which helps the survival of the species. And then they say a cup of milk contains 7.7 grams of this casein, 80% of its casein anyway, the milk protein. When it's converted to cheddar cheese, the protein content multiplies 7-fold to 56 grams. It's the most concentrated form of casein in any food in the grocery store. Basically, if milk is cocaine, then cheese is crack. And by the way, to quote from Forbes magazine from the article, companies that sell cheese are well aware of this. They leverage our addiction to their benefit. And they go through this whole thing about this presentation that the Dairy Management Company Incorporated said, the key to increasing demand is to trigger cheese cravings. Right. Anyhow. And here's one other piece. This is from Al Carroll. He's the author of President's Body Counts, the 12 worst and 4 best presidents based on how many lived or died. And this is basically, ranking presidents based on body counts. And he says the worst president ever was actually Nixon for what he did in Cambodia, which he says, what many argue is outright genocide. He ordered the carpet bombing and invasion of a neutral country for no reason other than to convince conservatives he was still tough on communism. At least 500,000 people were killed, and an additional 50,000 were outright executed in Cambodia by Nixon. So here are the 12 worst presidents that he ranks. Nixon, and now this was written before Trump was president. This was written a couple of years ago. Nixon, Reagan, Jackson, Buchanan, Polk, Fillmore, Clinton, Ford, Truman, McKinley, G.W. Bush, and Andrew Johnson. Those are the 12 worst, ranked by body counts. The 4 best, Lincoln, Van Buren, Carter, and Grant. And then there were 5 presidents who had high body counts, but they also did a bunch of good stuff. Jefferson, FDR, Lyndon Johnson, Bush Sr., and Obama. So for what it's worth, a fascinating thing. Martin in Atlanta. Martin, you wanted to weigh in on our vote here?
Yes, I do. And I want to say Harry Truman.
Because of the nuclear bombs he dropped in Japan?
No, that's up there. But the main thing is that following the death of Franklin Roosevelt, he did not pick up the gauntlet thrown down by Roosevelt to establish the Second Bill of Rights. This would have established as law of the land a well-paying job, or a living wage, health care, education, fair housing, all the things that we have real problems with today would have been established as U.S. law back in the 1940s. We would have had 40 years of that law by the time Reagan came around to try to undo everything. It would have been really hard to be where we are today if the previous few generations lived with health care and college and fair wage.
But Harry Truman did introduce legislation to establish a national health care system. He was the first to do that. And, it didn't even get a vote in Congress. The Congress, flipped Republican in the election of 46. And so 47, 48, you had a Republican Congress, and as I recall. And so, he was, and then he had the war in Korea, which just, crippled him. I mean, that's why Dwight Eisenhower became president. He ran on a platform of vote for peace, vote for Eisenhower, that he promised he would end the Korean War, which he did.
Well, it certainly was bad timing as far as the Korean War breaking out. But the main thing was the preoccupation with the anti-communism.
Yeah.
But going to the people. I mean, with Roosevelt's death, Roosevelt was a hero to the land, and it could have been taken to the people.
Yeah. Like LBJ did when Kennedy died, by the way. He used Kennedy's death to basically push through the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act.
Well, that's what I'm saying. He finished the work of Kennedy, and I just think it's a real shame for us all today that Truman didn't put more effort into trying to establish the work of that.
Well, they did.
Laid out.
They did. The power brokers in the Democratic Party did choose the haberdasher from from wherever he was from, Missouri. Forget the town.
Yeah, that's that.
Independence,
because if they would have gone with the current vice president, with Roosevelt's vice president, he was very progressive on so many levels that.
Who's that?
Even today,
Wallace.
What was his name? Wallace.
Yeah, Henry Wallace was his president, his vice president in his third term, and then Harry Truman in his fourth term. And had Henry Wallace, been vice president for his fourth term as well, which I think it was a huge mistake for them to. But it wasn't Roosevelt's choice. Roosevelt wanted Henry Wallace to stay on, but the power brokers in the Democratic Party just thought Wallace was way too left, and which is really tragic because he was just echoing Franklin Roosevelt. But they knew. That there was a very real possibility that the vice president would succeed the president, and they thought Harry Truman would be better for business, which is, just bizarre and tragic. Okay, Martin, your vote is recorded.
Which is where we are today with much of the Democratic Party, too. That's why we got to get the money out of politics and vote progressive Democrats in.
Amen. We need another FDR. Martin, thank you for the call. Arthur in Malden, Mass. Am I saying that right, Arthur?
No, it's Malden.
Malden, Mass.
Malden, Massachusetts.
Okay,
Hi.
sorry about that.
Hi, I've been listening to your show since Air America, and just wanted to say thank you first off. But my vote is George W. Bush.
Mm-hmm. Because?
Well, I was in the Army for 9 years, and I had to go to Iraq.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to remind people that, hundreds of thousands of people died because of George W. Bush's invasion.
Perhaps even millions. I mean, the official number is 500,000, but I think that's wildly undercounted.
I agree. And, George W. Bush's popularity during his first year was a lot higher than Donald Trump's. I just want to remember that.
Yeah. Well, 9/11 helped him, and he exploited 9/11 like a real demagogue. I mean, he could have mobilize the countries around the world to use the international police agencies like Interpol to find and arrest Osama bin Laden. In fact, Mullah Omar of Afghanistan, who ran Afghanistan, offered to arrest bin Laden and turn him over to a third country for trial. And George W. Bush said, no, we'd rather bomb the crap out of your country. Thank you very much. It'll be very profitable for the military-industrial complex. And I get to be a war president, and I get to sound, tough and muscular, which is, the whole, all these people in the GOP, that's what they just love, tough, muscular presidents. It's so sad. Arthur, excellent point. Thank you. Dan in Huntsville, Alabama. Dan, your vote?
Hey, Tom. Well, it's tough. They all are so bad, Reagan, it has to be Reagan, because without him, I don't think it'd be Trump, like some of the callers said. Plus, you know, Trump will come and go, and all those Reagan statues will still be there.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, the Truman one was interesting to me because things in the past have a little bigger effect in the future. Like if we'd have had Medicare for all for 100 years, this would be a totally different country.
Yeah.
But Reagan, to me, with Trump in the future, Trump will come and go, and they're going to still be Reagan the God, you know, and that's the...
And that's a really important point, by the way, the stickiness of things. You know, Germany first got single-payer health care in the 1880s, and which is why Hitler didn't take it down. It's why, you know, it's why Germany still has, well, they've got a modified version of it now. I mean, Helmut Kohl really messed with it more than anybody else. But, you know, still, health care is a right, not a privilege in Germany, and has been since the 1880s. In Canada, you know, Tommy Douglas gave Canada single-payer health care. And, you know, he's to this day revered as the most famous of Canadians. So those what may seem at the time to be relatively small accomplishments are really, really huge over time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Well said, Dan. Thanks a lot for the call. Let's see. I got. Oh, I only have 20 seconds here. That's really not fair to put somebody on. I just wanted to flag for you. I've got a piece that I submitted to Alternate this morning. I'm not sure if or when they'll put it up, but it's titled, "Thank the GOP for your 401k losses." And it starts out, the GOP tax scam was the straw that broke the market's back. Here's why and how. And it's basically, you know, we're running on debt. And then the Republicans added $1.5 trillion to our debt so that they could borrow that money from China and give that money to the Koch brothers, the Walton family, the Mercers, you know, et cetera. All these billionaires just got massively richer as a result of the GOP tax scam. And that's one of the things that over the long term is going to bring our markets down, even if this was just a correction. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be checking in with Talk Media News in a few minutes, but in the meantime, we're asking who was the worst president in the history of the United States? Welcome back. Heidi, watching Free Speech TV in Bellevue, Washington. Heidi, your vote?
Yeah, Tom, I'm not watching Free Speech TV. I'm listening to KBCS.
Oh, well, that's fine, too.
Anyway, yeah, I think Bill Clinton was our worst president, and I made a list here so I wouldn't forget. By normalizing the right-wing agenda, he instituted the war against government with the era of big government being over. He created the prison industrial complex for his war on minorities and the poor. NAFTA, welfare reform, he began, you know, that's where he destroyed the safety net. He zeroed out Section 8 vouchers. I called you a couple weeks ago that I was from a military family, and he began his war on military families. That's when benefits and, you know, this sort of thing was reduced. Somebody called after me last time about my, quote, idyllic military life, childhood. It was not idyllic. There was a great deal of child abuse, including sexual abuse, because, you know, my father had been through 3 wars and had PTSD. But the point that I was trying to make was that there were government programs available so that I wasn't an inner city kid. You know, even though I was undergoing a lot of abuse, you know, I suffer from clinical depression and anxiety because of it. There were government programs in there that caught me because I was a military
and you
child.
And you think that Bill Clinton cut up those programs? So yeah, okay, I got it. Heidi, thank you. Sandra in Everett, Washington, your vote?
My vote's for Reagan.
Tell me why.
Because I feel he started this whole war on the working class, and once the ball gets rolling, you can't correct everything, and it just gets worse. And now it picks up speed as it goes downhill, and we have Trump.
Yeah. Reagan fundamentally altered the course of our country, and then Clinton didn't reverse that. He slowed it slightly or put a Democratic face on it. And, frankly, every president, including Obama since then, we're still living in the Reagan era. And,
I believe so.
Yeah, and it's a terrible thing. Okay, Sandra, thank you for your vote.
Okay, well, thank you, because I am just getting more involved, and a lot of it's due to you. You
Great.
give us such good facts, and they're facts that people can research, not just things that you say off the top of your head.
Great. Well, thank you for your comments, and thanks for your brevity. Thank you, Sandra. Robert in Riverside, California. Hey, Robert, what's up?
Well, hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm well. We've got about 25 seconds, 30 seconds here.
Great. I want to cast my vote for Woodrow Wilson as the worst president of the United States.
Because
Woodrow Wilson held a strong racist viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
He was a segregationist, and he set the policies in motion with human rights attacks that lasted for decades and set back the decades before him that tried to promote a racial understanding between people.
Yeah, you're right on all that stuff. In fact, he screened Birth of a Nation in the White House, which was pretty amazing.
Unbelievable. And I think he was one of the first people to promote eugenics, and he was a professor
Yes.
of a very important college, and I can't believe that somebody with that degree of science knowledge would promote something like eugenics, which I believe...
Right, and he used PR to sell us on World War I, although you can argue whether that was a bad thing or not. But, Robert, thank you. I wouldn't rank him the worst, but it's pretty bad. Thank you, Robert.
Hi there, I'm Marie with Free Speech TV. Your support, whether through giving donations, volunteering, or spreading the word about Free Speech TV, has made it possible for the only independent progressive news network to exist. And for that, I want to say thank you. Now you can give to the network powered by the people by donating an unwanted or used vehicle through our Vehicles of Change program. If you have an old car, RV, or even a motorcycle, Free Speech TV can use it to grow and thrive. You can make a bigger difference in supporting Free Speech TV by giving an old car. It's a great way to support the network without having to dig into your bank account. Just call 877-378-8669 and ask for more information about Vehicles of Change. Again, the number to call is 877-378-8669. If it has a VIN, we'll take it in. Thank you.
You by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Loving What You Do, the new book by Ellen Ratner. Luke Vargas is on the line with us, the chief foreign correspondent for Talk Media News. Luke, welcome back to the program, first of all.
Thank you.
Thank you. You've got this Julian Assange event going on in the UK. What's happening?
Yes, so his lawyers were in court today arguing that the warrant against him by British authorities should be dropped. This is one of 4 different arguments his legal team is making, and they, you could say, lost the first case today. This does not mean Assange's legal battle is over, but a judge, M. Arbuthnot, who issued a one-sentence ruling today, basically said she did not think there was a case for British authorities to withdraw the warrant against him. They have a warrant out because the Swedish government several years ago was looking into allegations of a sex-related crime. They never charged him, but they wanted him to come to Sweden to answer some questions, and he did not appear before the Swedish authorities, and so the Brits went after him for basically not following the terms of his bail, and that charge remains. His lawyers are now going to argue, and we're going to learn next week, so it's been postponed by 7 days, whether or not there's a public interest case for this warrant to be dropped. And I think this is where, as much as many in the United States have lost their love for WikiLeaks through time, and as sort of their tactics and desire to sort of inject themselves into various political dialogues rub people the wrong way. This is where his case begins to line up with broader interests about freedom of the press, freedom of publication. There's a lot of nervousness that while there may be some validity to the Brits bringing him into court, that there could be a secret extradition request that the United States has communicated to the Brits, and that as soon as he's in court, then he gets sucked to the United States.
I'd say that's that's a virtual certainty. Last week I was browsing Julian Assange's Twitter feed, and unless I was fooled by a really good imitator or troll, it seems like he's become a Trump troll. He's gung-ho Trump. What's the deal here?
Well, I wish I could fully explain sort of what his motives are. I think that's still difficult for many people to do. There is, it seems, still valid documents being released on the WikiLeaks platform. I've used their reporting many times in recent years on sort of lesser known issues of transparency, including even recently on, offshore finances and things like that, which they do host on their site. But then you start to wonder, what was the same rationale for taking Michael Wolff's book and, leaking it fully 2 days before its release? That seemed like it was an obvious attempt to undercut, a story that was going to be critical to President Trump and deny the author revenues that he probably deserves. So that's sort of hard to argue why, stealing someone's creative work.
I know he's still very bent out of shape about the argument that's being made by the U.S. intelligence community that Russia hacked the DNC and released the documents to WikiLeaks. And he's adamant, saying he did not get those from Russia. What's the status of that?
Well, look, that's the central argument that they're going to make next week, or have already argued, and we're going to hear next week, is that there's a public interest in having people like Julian Assange do their work. Now, he aligns himself with journalists, saying that he's merely publishing documents that he did not himself obtain. And that legal defense is almost identical to what American media houses are saying as they...
It's what Facebook says.
Administration. Right. It's what Facebook says. It's what many other investigative outlets say when they hear rumors, and there have been reports in the New York Times that this DOJ under President Trump is exploring bringing charges against media houses for just publishing truthful information to the public, that the truthfulness of the content doesn't, get the media houses off the hook. So I think that's, one of the major reasons there's a lot of interest.
Pence is on his way to South Korea, or apparently has arrived there, and the Olympic opening ceremonies are coming up. He took with him Otto Warmbier's father, which is a slap in the face to the North Koreans. And, Trump has been doing all this rhetoric, cranking up the tensions. What do you expect Pence to do?
Well, it's pretty obvious that the Pence and the U.S., by extension, and the South Koreans are just on different pages right now about how they want to, send signals about the North Korean crisis. When we learned earlier this week that the 90-year-old sort of quasi-president of North Korea, Kim Jong-nam, was going to go to South Korea, the highest level politician to ever come to South Korea since the 1950s, the South Korean presidency put out all these statements saying this is a sign that these two countries believe in peace, that they care about the peaceful, power of the Olympic Games, la-di-da-di-da. And then the same day you hear from the vice president's office that Fred Warmbier's attendance is meant as a direct signal that interacting with North Korea will only bring upon greater atrocities. That is a huge, it's seeming, to undercut the argument that the South Koreans are making, and that they would seem, as hosts of the Games, the right to have a little bit more of a say about how their Olympics are being politicized. But nonetheless, Mike Pence is going to be trying to, attract a very different tone of coverage to what the South Koreans are hoping for.
Yeah, I just can't imagine that happening in the Obama administration, or even even the Reagan administration. Anyhow, Luke Vargas with Talk Media News. Thank you, Luke.
Thank you, Tom.
Yep. Bye-bye. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by ecowine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, ecowine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. Thom Hartmann University Book Club today. We're reading from It's Even Worse Than You Think, What the Trump Administration is Doing to America by David K. Johnston. This is from page 61, the chapter titled Forgetting the Forgotten Man. In 2010, the U.S. Department of Labor created a website to honor workers who died on the job. Quote, more than 4,500 workers, lose their lives on the job every year. Below are the names of just a few who have died in recent months. OSHA's mission is to prevent workplace injuries, illnesses, and death, end quote. That Occupational Safety and Health Administration webpage was intended to highlight and humanize workplace deaths, to ensure awareness of tragedies, especially those that could have been avoided, according to Jordan Barab, an Assistant Secretary of Labor during the Obama administration. Barab explained, without information like this, fatality statistics are just raw, sterile numbers. The purpose of adding names and circumstances was to impress people with the tragedy that workers and their families face day after day. In August 2017, Trump's Labor Department quietly removed the preamble and the names when it killed the web page. It also took down, without public announcement, the fatality inspection data for all years prior to 2017. Those were just two of many other Trump administration actions inimical to worker safety. Others included no longer posting press releases about deaths resulting from unsafe working conditions, delaying rules to reduce sickness and death from inhaling silica and beryllium at work, delaying rules to lower the risk of railroad engineers and truck drivers falling asleep at the switch or wheel because of untreated sleep apnea, and the appointment to the Supreme Court of a judge who held that a company had the right to fire a worker who chose not to freeze to death on the job. A reasonable person listening to Donald Trump's inaugural address would never have expected these and other actions, assuming he believed what Trump said. Trump declared, "The forgotten men and women of our country will be forgotten no more. You came by the tens of millions to become part of a historic movement, the likes of which the world has never seen before. At the center of this movement is a crucial conviction that a nation exists to serve its citizens," end quote. Those men and women were forgotten again the following week. And it's not just workers whose interests were forgotten, not to mention who were put in danger. By deciding not to implement a rule to reduce the chances of truck drivers and train operators falling asleep at the wheel, Trump put at risk the lives of families driving along the highway, people riding on passenger trains, and many others. The White House called it President Trump's war on regulation. In his weekly radio address in early May, he declared that we've removed one job-killing regulation after another, and they're not pretty, and they're going. And believe me, we're just getting started on regulations. They're gone. Removal of data on workplace deaths, which averaged 13 per day, infuriated Jordan Barab, who is Obama's number 2 at OSHA. As a private citizen, Barab created a web page to keep track of the names of the dead and the reasons they were killed on the job. He called it, "OSHA won't tell you who died in the workplace, we will." After the election, Barab's concerns that the Trump administration would be bad for workers increased when he asked where the Trump beachhead team was and learned that none was coming. Each incoming administrator sends people to scope out federal agencies, learn who does what, and get a feel for the place in advance. Then the incoming administration sends its landing team, the people who will initially implement its policies for each agenda or at each agency.
When no beachhead team came up, Barab figured it meant worker safety simply was not a priority for Trump. He hoped that was the worst of it, nothing more than apathy about worker safety. But when the landing team arrived, Barab realized trouble was coming for American workers, and it was not official apathy, but the start of assaults on workers' rights and safety. Barab said most of them had no idea they were going to labor and no interest in workers' issues either. What they did have was a mandate to delay, repeal, or weaken regulations that protected workers as part of Trump's plan to eliminate, quote, any regulation that is outdated, unnecessary, bad for workers, or contrary to the national interest, end quote. The first sign came when Trump nominated Judge Neil Gorsuch to the Supreme Court. Gorsuch was an acolyte of Antonin Scalia, whose seat he would be taking. Like Scalia, he said statutes should be literally read, and if that made no sense, well, that was a problem for Congress. Also like Scalia, he had a habit of consulting dictionaries, often following Scalia's practice of relying on the third, fourth, or even lesser definition of a word when it supported his jurisprudence. Trump's nomination alarmed unions. Jody Calamine, a communications worker of America lawyer, told Gorsuch's Senate confirmation hearing that Gorsuch, quote, is a threat to working people's health and safety, end quote. Calamine cited Gorsuch's dissent in the 2016 case to make this his point. That dissent, he said, reveals an anti-worker bias and features the judicial activism that will ultimately put workers' lives at risk, end quote. Those are unusually strong words about a Supreme Court nominee, but a review of the case shows Gorsuch has little regard for human life, at least when it comes to employers' power over their workers. He considers a rigid interpretation of the law more important. The case was about a law Congress passed giving workers the right to refuse dangerous tasks. Gorsuch said, no, you may not refuse. It's even worse than you think, by David K. Johnston.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So we're broadly today discussing who might be the worst president in the history of the United States. To bring this back to Donald Trump, you know, one of the big challenges that the media has, and frankly that the Democratic Party has, in fact, for that matter, the Republican Party has with Donald Trump, is that the guy lies so easily. He just, I mean, he literally does not care about the truth. In his book, Art of the Deal, or the book that was ghostwritten for him, but, you know, Tony, what's his name, the guy who wrote that, interviewed Trump at length and kind of took his words and turned it into the book. He says that basically exaggerating is not really lying. Or for that matter, telling somebody a lie, if it causes them to believe what you want them to believe, it's okay. I mean, he has a number of different words to describe legitimate lies. And one of the lies he's been promoting is that he stopped the hemorrhaging of American jobs, that he has stopped American jobs from going overseas. But in fact, the Republican tax scam has, this is from tax expert Stephen Rosenthal, he says, under the new tax bill, a company making $20 million on foreign profits under the new tax bill would only pay $1 million in taxes, whereas if they had a factory in the United States, the same factory in the United States, they'd pay $4 million in taxes. Now, given that, what company is going to keep their factory in the United States? There's a huge incentive to outsource built into the Republican tax scam, the GOP tax scam. They also note more than 10,000 jobs at federal contractors. This is your tax dollars and mine, companies that contract with the federal government, whether it's defense contractors or whether it's, you know, whatever it may be. 10,000 jobs at federal contractors have been sent overseas since Trump was elected. That's double the average number of jobs that went overseas from federal contractors every year during the Obama administration. He writes, all told, in the years since Trump was elected, the he, by the way, is Tim Fernholz, who wrote this. This is over at QZ.com. That's more, excuse me, since all told in the years since Trump was elected, more than 93,000 jobs have been certified by the Department of Labor. This isn't some left-wing think tank coming up with this. This is the U.S. Department of Labor within the Trump administration. More than 93,000 jobs have been certified by the Department of Labor as lost to outsourcing, which is higher than the 87,000 average in the preceding 5 years. So, yeah, jobs were going overseas at the rate of 100,000 more or less a year during the Obama administration. They're going overseas even faster under the Trump administration. So does that make Trump the worst president? Or could it be? I mean, somebody on Twitter said, oh, no, it was FDR. He put people in prison because they were Japanese. That was pretty bad. But does that make him the worst president? I would say no, not a chance. I'm guessing that that's a foxhead. Foxhead doesn't sound as bad as cokehead, does it? So we gotta come up with a phrase to describe people who are addicted to Fox so-called news. Anyhow, David in Tulsa, Oklahoma. Hey, David, what's on your mind today? Who are you voting for worst president?
Okay, I'm going to tell you the first thing I want to tell you why I don't put Ronald Reagan as number one.
Okay.
And the reason is Dr. Helen Caldicott said that, has written several times that after the first 5 minutes that she met Reagan in '81 to talk about nuclear proliferation, that she realized he had Alzheimer's.
Yeah,
and
she's a physician. Yeah.
She is a physician. And she is, you can look it up and anything, and she recognized immediately that he had Alzheimer's, which means that the Republican Party knew this, which means that they put him in even though he was mentally incapable of being the president. But
what year was that, David? Do you know?
That was '81.
Really? When he began in office, he had Alzheimer's?
Yes. Yes.
Wow. Well, you know, it does. I mean, my mother died of Alzheimer's, so I've seen this. When she was in her 50s, we thought that she had ADHD or something. By the time she was in her 60s, she was pretty forgetful. By the time she was in her 70s, it was gone, or it was going fast.
Okay, so that puts my vote for Nixon. And the reason why is Nixon is the one that started the war on drugs, and really weaponized the FBI and our intelligence agencies against the population of the United States. Right. I want to add one little economic thing to counter on one of your other topics earlier that you mentioned that I wanted to get out to you, was when they changed the tax deduction of being able to take credit, deduct that from your income taxes, and they turned around and made the only tax that you could take would be a mortgage interest on your house.
Right, that was during Reagan, wasn't it?
That's right. And that made everybody all of a sudden switch over. Instead of having credit cards, everything was attaching your credit to your mortgage.
Right, because people used to, prior to Reagan, you could deduct the interest you paid to your credit card company from your taxes.
Exactly. Which set up for the S&L and, of course, the debacle over them, because then everybody was leveraged with their mortgages against that. Right. And then the other thing was changing over so that CEOs and the officers of companies no longer had pension plans. They got their own special pension plan rather than like with my father and everybody else, the president of the company, everybody was a member of the pension plan, including the guy that ran the pensions.
Right.
Which gave them an incentive.
That was a Reagan change, too. I mean, Reagan radically changed pensions. He also changed it prior to Reagan. If you had a company with a pension plan that you were administering, or even if somebody else administered it, but it was your company and your money you paid into, you had to book that pension as a liability, as money that you owe to somebody in the future. And Reagan flipped that upside down and said, no, if you've got $1 million sitting in a pension plan, even though it's pledged to your employees when they retire, you can call that $1 million an asset. And that kicked off the corporate raiding. You know, they started, the first thing they did is they went after companies that had big pension plans. TWA at the top of the list. You know, Carl Icahn taking it down and stripping the pension plans out and selling them off.
Actually, before that was City Service with T-Bone Pickens and then Carl Icahn.
Oh, yeah, you're right.
After City Service. But I wanted to put a final thing about Nixon was he used treason to get in office, as we know from the LBJ tapes.
Yep.
That he was the one that normalized the whole idea of using high treason against a sitting president.
Which is why Reagan thought that he could get away with it and did it. Although if Reagan had Alzheimer's, Bill Casey thought he could get away with it. And Reagan rewarded Bill Casey by making him his campaign manager.
Right.
And by making him CIA director, actually.
Right. But here, this all begins with Nixon.
Yeah.
And of course, GOP TV and the whole idea when he started the think tank.
Yeah, Roger Ailes pitched that to Richard Nixon.
Right, and Heritage Foundation and the Olin Scafee Foundation, and that was the start
Cato
of
Institute.
Cato.
Yeah. All that, yeah, you're right. All that stuff happened, all that stuff started in the early 70s and then led to the 76 Supreme Court decision. Nixon put Lewis Powell on the Supreme Court in 73, or 72, I think it was. 71 was the Powell memo. And then in 76, Powell, ruled on the Supreme Court that if a billionaire or a corporation wants to own a politician, that's considered free speech under the First Amendment of the Constitution. That was the Buckley versus Vallejo decision, and which set up Citizens United.
Reagan did not have full mental capability. He thought he actually had been a pilot of a B-52 bomber.
Yeah.
He thought he actually had been the captain of a submarine. All this, which was, yes, you were an actor. You played the part. And he was a consummate actor. He said his lines with conviction, and he played his part well. But he was a useful idiot, just like George Bush Jr. was a useful idiot.
Yeah.
And, of course, Trump is Zaphod Beetlebrox.
Yeah.
If you're familiar with the...
Yeah, well said, David. Well said. Thanks for listening to us on Sirius XM there in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I appreciate the call, David. We'll be right back. It's coming up on 15 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And by the way, the stock market seems to have stabilized a little, but it's still way down. We'll be back. Welcome back. Nicholas in San Cristobal, Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, your vote for worst president?
Yes. Truman, and not just for, I think, you asked the previous caller, was it because of the atomic bombs? Mm-hmm. That is certainly a significant part of why, but also because, and thank you for taking my call again, thank you. Also because the unleashing of the atomic bombs in both Nagasaki and Hiroshima not only unleashed atomic energy against an unsuspecting population, but because it unleashed the incredible fear of atomic weaponry and then later nuclear weaponry, for which the atomic bomb was simply the trigger for a nuclear bomb, if that's even imaginable.
Yeah, which led us to duck and cover in the 50s. And,
yes,
yeah.
Which I lived through. And
me too.
As well. And then it went on much further. It led, I think, directly to the ever-increasing military-industrial budget that Eisenhower so presciently warned us about.
Yep.
And bravely, frankly, I think, as well.
I agree.
And I think we're still in the miasma of that fear. It led to the, I needn't say, you know perfectly well what it led to, an incredible increase in the military spending of both Russia and the United States in direct competition with each other for direct fear of further unleashing of those powers. And I think that, in turn, led to an incredible amount of withdrawal of incredibly badly needed money for not just infrastructure, but education, for health care, for all kinds of things that have been negated by that fear.
Yeah.
So, Truman.
So we've been pouring trillions, actually, into the Pentagon ever since.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think probably, Tom.
But do you think that Truman had any idea that that was going to be the outcome?
Did I?
Yeah.
I feared it, yes. I did fear it because I think we
No, but do you think
saw the
Truman
effects of it so quickly?
Do you think that I mean, you know, the atomic bomb was not developed to drop on Japan. It was developed to take out Hitler because, you know, when they started the Manhattan Project, there was a very real possibility Hitler was going to win World War II. And if he had not invaded Russia when he did, he may well have ended up at least conquering all of Europe. And
Probably.
and
Or very possibly.
and it would have been, and there would have been very little we could have done about it.
Yes,
So
it would have gone too far. Yes.
right. So Truman had this bomb made, and then according to some historians, and I realize there's a lot of debate about this, but the story du jour is that he wanted to scare the crap out of Joe Stalin. He wanted to say, we're gonna go into post-war negotiations, and we just want you to know that we're in charge here. We're the big dog on the street, and that's why he dropped the bomb. It was a tactical, it was a strategic, a geopolitical strategic thing rather than.
Tom, in my estimation, that makes the dropping of it on Nagasaki and Hiroshima even that much worse.
That's my point.
Thank you.
That's my point. And
I think certainly, I mean, unless I'm completely off my rocker, which I hope I'm not. I don't think I am. Why could that not have been shown to some of the powers that be in an offshore island like Bikini, where it was first, set off? I think anybody in even 1/4 of their right mind would have instantly recognized the power of this thing. It took the Japanese 3 days to surrender, after all, only. I think 2 weeks at the outside, in which time we could have withdrawn our forces to not confront them and save lives in that way as well. So the saving lives thing, I think, is
agreed. I'm very unhappy about the bomb being dropped on Japan. I think it was a terrible thing.
And I think we still suffer from it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you made a very, very good case for that, Nicholas. Thank you for the call. We'll be back. Back to the news. Last night, apparently, Sean Hannity said that the stock market correction here the last 2 days was, or the crash, whatever you want to call it, was caused by Barack Obama. Yeah, seriously. So today, Andy Borowitz in the New Yorker says, he's got this great story from the Borowitz report. One day after the Fox News Channel host Sean Hannity blamed him for the historic plunge in the Dow Jones Industrial Average, former President Barack Obama agreed to stop making stocks tumble. Obama told reporters on Tuesday morning, Sean Hannity has accused me of making the stock market go down. All I have to say is guilty as charged. A visibly chastened Obama said that at first he thought he'd gotten away with making the stock market crash. But when he saw Hannity blame him on Fox, he said, I knew I had been busted. Obama offered scant explanation for why he caused stocks to crash on Monday. Quote, I guess since leaving the White House, I haven't really found enough to fill my time. So tanking the stock market seemed like something to do. It goes on from there. If you want to read the whole thing, check out the New Yorker. Andy Borowitz's column is just, must-read reading. Gene in Pittston, Pennsylvania. Hey, Gene, thanks for listening to WSTE. What's your vote for who the worst president is?
Well, thank you so much for your show. I'm really learning a lot as I'm listening. But I'm still going to stick with Donald Trump. And the reason why, I'm 57, and I've never seen an attack on our American institutions like he's unleashed. And even like going back to appointing Jeff Sessions as Attorney General, if you're going to reach out and be a president to all people, why do you pick someone so blatantly racist as him? Yeah. And then, we have Nick Mulvaney in charge of the Consumer Protection Bureau. We have everyone that's in charge of the bureau. They're destroying it and dismantling it. And his attacks on the press are very dangerous because we're living in uncharted territory now. Like people don't believe the news; they only listen to the news they want to. So it's really frightening. And I think Trump resembles Adolf Hitler to me. I was afraid to say it in the beginning, but now I'm not afraid. I think he's very akin to a dictator.
Yeah, Godwin's law be damned. The difference between Trump and Hitler, though, is that Hitler was actually a very smart man, and he knew what he was doing, and he was doing it intentionally, and he surrounded himself with people who were supporting that. Trump, I don't think Trump grasps the consequences of his actions. I think Trump just, it's all about me. It's all about Trump, and he's driven by this deep narcissism, this deep insecurity, and
Well, he already dropped the mother of all bombs on Syria, and he almost looked.
No, that
like,
was Afghanistan.
Oh, I'm sorry, Afghanistan, yes. Yeah. But he looks almost like he's so insecure that he needs a war under his belt, and that scares me more than anything.
Yes.
Is this guy talks about buttons and nuclear threats, and he taunts Kim Jong-un, and he just is so frightening.
Yeah.
That every day I wake up and say, "Oh my God."
Well, and Pence is gung ho 100%. I mean, he's taking Fred Warmbier to South Korea, or has taken, and just to shove it in the face of the North Koreans. While North Korea, in a gesture of attempted reconciliation, which, by the way, the South Korean president was elected on a platform of reconciling with North Korea, having peace rather than war. He's taking out a Warmbier to shove it in the face of the president of North Korea, which is not Kim Jong-un is the god of North Korea. I don't know what his official title is, but they actually have a president who, like the president of Israel, has basically no power. It's a functional thing. He's 90 years old. He's a functionary, but he's coming, and that's hugely symbolic. And what Pence is doing is hugely symbolic too, in a way that that radically increases the probability of war on the peninsula, which is just a disaster. Gene, I got to move along, but thank you for the call and thanks for listening to the program. Bill in Clifton, New Jersey, listening on Sirius XM. Hey, Bill, your vote.
Hey, yeah, hi, Tom. I think you keep touching on something that I thought of, in that when you're sizing up the existential threats that any of these presidents have brought, you have to understand the magnitude of their unintentional consequences, and what was pure evil as opposed to what was stupidity.
Right.
But my all-time is Warren G. Harding for Reaganomics 1.0.
Oh, yeah.
Led to World War II, and 100 million people died.
Yeah, let us not forget, Warren Harding campaigned on a platform of two things. Number one, dropping the top tax rate from 91% to 25%, which he did, which kicked off the Roaring '20s, which led directly to the Great Crash and the Republican Great Depression. And number two, his slogan was less government in business, more business in government. In other words, deregulate and privatize, which he did.
Right.
And it decimated the American, it wiped us out. And then when we got wiped out as one of the largest economies in the world got wiped out. And you're right, that set the stage for Adolf Hitler's rise.
It exacerbated Germany, and it was the pure path for Hitler to rise, and 100 million people died as a result of that. I don't think you can top that.
Yeah. Was 100 million the death toll of World War II? I thought it was 20 million.
I thought it was 20 million just in Russia. I don't know.
Just in Russia. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I'd have to go back and look. I'm not a World War II scholar, but it's still even 1 million people. I mean, what Nixon killed. Well, Nixon killed 2 million people in Vietnam and Cambodia.
Right, but the Civil War.
Nate just Googled it. He says it's 60 million total in World War II. Oh, so it was right between our two numbers here, Bill. Bill, I got to run, but thanks for the call. Excellent point. Irene in Park Ridge, Illinois. Hey, Irene, your vote?
Hi, Tom. Yeah, I think that Reagan was the worst domestically, and I would say George W. Bush was the worst globally in terms of foreign policy.
At least so far, right?
Yeah, I think Reagan did a terrible a job of labeling African Americans as criminals and dividing us between the two races.
Yeah.
And we're still living with this today. They're still struggling with trying to shake the image that a lot of people perceive of them.
Yeah. I'm with you.
Racist.
I'm with you. Irene, thank you for the call. And I got to run here. We're hitting a break. And thanks for listening to WCPT. We'll be right back with more of the news of the day. Your votes, my thoughts. Stick around.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Back with more in just a second. Stick around. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Jeffrey Sachs, Building the New American Economy, Smart, Fair, and Sustainable. This is from Chapter 13. It's titled, Restoring Trust in American Governance. More than any other threat facing America is the collapse of civic virtue.
meaning the honesty and trust that enables the country to function as a decent, forward-looking, optimistic nation. The defining characteristic of the 2016 presidential election is that neither candidate was trusted. The defining characteristic of American society in our day is that Americans trust neither their political institutions nor each other. We need a conscious effort to reestablish trust by making fair play an explicit part of the national agenda. We have already noted the collapse in public confidence in the federal government. The collapse of trust in each other is equally striking. For decades, pollsters have asked America whether most people can be trusted. And for decades, the proportion answering in the negative has been rising. There are probably two main reasons for this downward trend. The first is the sharp widening of income inequalities since the 1970s. The second is the widespread feeling that those at the top of the heap in income and power regularly abuse their wealth and influence. Donald Trump's relentless assertion in the 2016 campaign that the system is rigged, a claim that resonated widely despite the obvious irony that Trump himself had been a relentless rigger of the system. The system is indeed rigged for the big corporate interests, such as the drug companies that set drug prices 1,000 times the production cost. It's rigged for the large IT companies, such as Apple, that deploy egregious tax loopholes that enable them to park funds overseas in tax-free overseas accounts. It's rigged for the hedge fund managers who take home hundreds of millions of dollars in pay and then face a top income tax rate of 20%, far below what others, vastly poorer Americans, must pay. It's rigged for the investment bankers that deliberately cheated their clients and then walked away with a mere slap on the wrist, if that. And the fact that the Clintons parlayed public office and a family foundation into a vehicle for vast personal enrichment was not lost on an unhappy and distrustful electorate. Considerable social science research in recent years has given laboratory evidence to an ancient truth that power and wealth do indeed corrupt. Consider a fascinating psychology experiment recently published in Nature, a leading scientific journal. The employees of a major international bank were divided randomly into two groups, a control group and a treatment group. Both groups were given forms to fill out at the start of the experiment. The control group was asked general questions. The treatment group was asked questions about their role in banking. Then each group was asked to flip coins and report honestly how many heads they flipped, being told that a greater number of heads would lead to a higher monetary reward. The control group reported that they flipped around 50% heads, an honest report. The treatment group claimed to have flipped around 58% heads, a dishonest report that exaggerated the proportion of heads flipped. The conclusion? Simply by being reminded that they were bankers by filling out the form about banking, the treatment group was spurred on to cheat. The psychologist concluded that the business culture of banking within that representative bank was a culture of cheating and greed. One feels that America is like that today, especially at the top. This is an age of impunity, a time when the rich and powerful get away with their misdeeds and are even lauded for them in some quarters. Donald Trump met the accusation that he had not paid income taxes for years with the response, "That makes me smart." Goldman Sachs CEO Lloyd Blankfein met the charge that his bank had cheated its customers with the response that they were, quote, doing God's work. Hedge fund manager John Paulson was celebrated on Wall Street for his cleverness in conspiring with Goldman Sachs to bilk a German bank out of hundreds of millions of dollars. The leaked emails show how the Clintons mixed their private, public, and foundation activities and simply confirm for many unhappy Americans that this is how the system works. The United States Supreme Court has shamelessly fed this impunity. In the infamous Citizens United case, the Supreme Court shockingly equated anonymous corporate contributions to political campaigns with free speech. The court demonstrated that it had no realistic sense of how such corporate contributions have undermined the legitimacy of our political system. In a more recent case, the Supreme Court overturned the conviction of former Virginia Governor Robert McDonnell, who had been convicted of fraud and extortion for taking gifts from a businessman promoting his health products to the state. McDonnell walked away free from a shoddy and egregious abuse of office. I've noted repeatedly that other high-income countries do not face these same trends. The U.S. pattern of rising inequality, falling trust, and increasing money in politics is not simply a reflection of the times or an inevitable side effect of democracy in the 21st century. Indeed, while many other countries are caught in a similar spiral of rising inequality, falling trust, increasing corruption, many others are not. Canada, for example, has successfully avoided these extremes, even though we share a common North American economy and a 3,000-mile border. Decency and trust can be maintained even in our complicated globalized times. While there's no magic wand to restore social trust in the United States, there are important guideposts for citizens, businesses, and public officials. I suggest 6 key steps. First, we should acknowledge the dangerous hold of the lobbyists and the super rich on the political process. While many incumbents in office today will not sever their ties with their campaign contributors, citizens should sever their ties with politicians who rely on such contributions. While many, so the book is Building the New American Economy, Smart, Fair, and Sustainable by Jeffrey Sachs. Podcasts at thomhartmann.com/podcast. They're commercial free and you can listen anytime, any place you want. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And Joe in Cupertino, California, your vote for the worst president of our lifetimes, Joe?
Great topic, Tom. Again, learning so much from this audience is so smart. But my father would say Nixon. My father's vote would be for Nixon. I remember him kicking the Packard Bell. He hated him. But I would say it's probably going to be this president is a clear and present danger today, although I have to reserve George Bush Jr. as being the worst president I can think of. We're talking about, how bad Trump is. And I can remember how they were talking about how bad Barack Obama was. And I can remember how bad we were talking about Clinton.
Oh, hang on just a second, Joe. Remember, just consider the Obama scandals. He wore a tan suit one day. Fox News melted down for 2 days over that. He saluted the guy, the officer standing next to the Marine One, next to his helicopter, holding a coffee cup in his hand. Oh, my God, the Republic was about to end. Excuse me, Joe.
I wanted to suggest, though, I think that we have to be cautious. The devil we know versus the devil we don't know. I think the President Clinton kind of really let us all down with that whole Monica Lewinsky thing. Such a sophomoric behavior when we had so much promise in the man. I think the same could be said about President Obama. We've handed Trump the keys. He could have closed Gitmo. He could have brought us home.
Actually, he couldn't. No, wait a second, Joe. President Obama actually issued an executive order to close Gitmo. And Congress, the Republican-controlled Congress, overruled him.
I think the important thing to realize is that neither Bush nor Trump are in any way concerned about what the Democrats think. So why would we as Democrats care about what the Republicans think?
Well, because we have to work with them, we have to live with them. They're our next door neighbors and our family members. It's not.
Yes, but
we can't just separate and revisit 1861.
Yes, but 8 years of Mitch McConnell not letting Barack Obama implement Barack Obama's policies tells me that we can't let President Trump implement his policies. Now, I don't want to do this for 8 more years. I don't want to do it for 2 more years, but we can't.
But we don't have the power to do that. Mitch McConnell runs the Senate, Paul Ryan runs the House, and you're right. For example, a clean DACA bill. It actually passed the Senate, which is kind of strange when you consider. But the new one, I don't think that. Paul Ryan wouldn't even allow a vote in the House, even though because he knew it would pass. There's a bunch of good legislation that actually has bipartisan support. Stuff, dialing back the national surveillance state, stuff reforming our immigration system. And a minority, but enough Republicans support these things, and a majority of Democrats support them. They would actually pass. And you're right, Mitch McConnell and Paul Ryan will not allow even a vote. That's wrong.
We were listening today to the West Virginia senator say how he wants to work with everybody, and I just can't see where we're going to be able to pass any kind of legislation that's going to meet what the left wants or the right. So why work with the guy?
Well, the problem Joe Manchin has is that so many people in West Virginia watch Fox News, and he is just he's got to avoid being identified as a liberal by Fox News, and I think that it's a wasted effort. I keep trying to remind people Bernie Sanders carried West Virginia by 21 points. If you are progressive and you're honest about it, you will win. It's just that simple. And Bernie Sanders would have easily trounced Trump, in my opinion. But anyhow, that's another war for another time.
We need to get this progressive ideas going. I'm not sure if Senator Sanders is going to run again, but it's more than just a person. We need to get a person out there. Even the gentleman from Ohio, the governor, what's his name, Kasich?
Yeah.
I think the campaign should be anybody but Hillary. and maybe we'll get some Trump voters to vote for our candidate.
Anybody but Hillary? Did you mean it that?
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton is not running for anything right now.
Let's hope that's true.
Oh, I guarantee you, she's not going to jump back in. But I also, actually believe that Bernie is going to be running, assuming that his health holds up. So, we'll see where it goes. But 3 more years, it's a long time. Although it'll be about 1.5 years before people start actually campaigning. It'll happen right after the November midterms. Joe, I gotta move along. But thank you for the call. Jill in Princeton, Minnesota. You have a vote for worst president?
Actually, I don't, but I would assume for me, it'd be Trump.
Okay.
Actually, I have a reminder for Minnesotans.
Okay, go for it.
Get out and vote. Get out and vote tonight at our caucuses. We have a lot at stake in Minnesota, our governorship, many other things, our congresspeople, state attorney generals.
Are these Democratic Party primary caucuses?
They are the primaries.
Okay.
For governorship, either Republican or Democrat.
Thank you.
And also, many members of Move to Amend will be out to present the We the People resolution.
Right. That just got picked up by a town in New Hampshire just this last week.
That's wonderful. We have 52 representatives in the House, and not one senator has signed on yet. But apparently, there's been a great deal of interest in the Senate. We just need to push them to get the very first senator to introduce it in the Senate.
Yeah.
And obviously, maybe not obviously, Move to Amend supports 2 basic tenets: that money is not speech and corporations are not persons. And we want to get big money out of politics and bring democracy back. In Minnesota, we need to get you out to vote. Wisconsin used to be a Democratic state. And look where they are now. We don't want that.
Yeah.
Thanks for the call, Tom. Thank you so much for what you do for Move to Amend in so many aspects.
Oh, it's my pleasure. They're one of my absolute favorite activist organizations, MoveToAmend.org. And Jill, thanks for the call. And thanks for letting me and everybody else know that tonight is caucus night in Minnesota. I was unaware of that. And, things slipped through the cracks here. That was one of them. My apologies for that, and my thanks to you for waking us all up. Jill, thank you for the call. Grace in Detroit. Hey, Grace, what's up?
Hi, Tom.
You have a vote?
Well, I'd like to vote for Ronnie Reagan.
Okay.
And the reason for that is because I believe that at a point in the 50s, they had a chance to get rid of the John Birch Society. And in my opinion, Reagan was the first of the John Birch.
Yeah, that was when Fred Koch was funding the John Birch Society to a large extent.
Yeah, but that opened the door. And that opening of the door was furthered. Each Republican that came next opened it further and further. And now we have the dilemma that Kochs virtually run the federal government in 34 states.
Right.
It allowed them to grow a web organization like, as you have mentioned in the past, is bigger than the Republican Party.
Yes. More well-funded, more employees, yeah.
How do we extract them from the formula in our government?
We do that by using what our last caller talked about. We amend the Constitution, which is the only way around the Supreme Court. Or actually, Congress can go around the Supreme Court, but they haven't shown the courage to do that since the founding of the Republic. So the way that we do that is by amending the Constitution to say 2 very simple things. When the Supreme Court ruled in 1976, or actually when the clerk of the Supreme Court wrote into a headnote in Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad in 1886 that corporations are people, that he was wrong. And that all the 34 or 37 Supreme Court decisions since then that have ratified that decision were all wrong, that corporations are not persons, number one. And number two, that when the Supreme Court, Lewis Powell in 1976 ruled in the Buckley versus Vallejo case that money is the same thing as free speech and is therefore using money to buy politicians or buy policy is protected by the First Amendment of the Constitution, that's not the case, that money is not the same thing as free speech.
Agree.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot, Grace. Good talking to you. Len in Pompano Beach, Florida. Your vote for worst president ever?
It is hands down Trump. It was just no question about it.
I mean, if you do on a percentage basis what he's done in 1/8 of a potential two-term disaster, everything has to do with the fact that he has zero conscience. I mean, and he acts as though the time on this planet that he's here is it for the Earth.
Yeah.
And it's just in every respect. I mean, just no conscience. Others did things with some attempt to maintain face, save face, present a reality that they actually know what's going on. He really doesn't care.
Yeah.
It's just a disaster.
Well, it even goes beyond he really doesn't care. He creates alternative realities and then uses them to promote himself.
For fun?
Say what?
For fun and profit.
Yeah, yeah. And the profit is consequential. I mean, he's spent, what, a quarter of his presidency or a third of his presidency now in Trump properties. He's jacking up the price of them. You've got, organizations, particularly right-wing organizations and foreign governments, using the Trump hotels as a way of ingratiating themselves with Donald Trump. And in fact, he had said he was going to give all the profits from foreign visitors to the Trump D.C. hotel, which at the very least is required by his lease.
Let me point something out.
And he's not doing it. Public Citizen is trying to sue him for it. Go ahead.
At the end of the Bush presidency, they took anything off the table about impeachment, about crimes. Barack Obama came in and didn't put one banker in jail.
Yep.
When and if we're allowed to get control of this government again, and we don't hold him account with a truth and reconciliation of where we are, our country is just going to continue its slide into fascism.
Yeah, we need a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. I mean, the South Africans did an extraordinary thing, and we should learn from that. Len, thank you for the call. Well said. We'll be back in just a moment. Stick around with more of your votes and thoughts and my thoughts and then the ongoing news of the day. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Right back after this. And welcome back. Marty in Evergreen Park, Illinois, watching on YouTube. Hey, Marty, what's up?
Hey, Tom. It was maybe not the worst, but Gerald Ford was a pretty ineffective president.
He was a bumbleblank, I mean, he just, he was a nice guy. He was an Eagle Scout, but I think he had an IQ of about 90. That's a unfair hit. Jerry Ford was probably an intelligent guy, but he was living in the shadow of Nixon.
Oh goodness, I know. Well, and he put Don Rumsfeld into his cabinet and Dick Cheney into his cabinet.
I had forgotten that.
I think he had made George H.W. Bush as CIA director, if I recall correctly, or so a lot of the guys that ended up being in George W. Bush's cabinet all came out of the Gerald Ford cabinet, and kind of set the precedence for what was to come, a few terms later. But
right.
Yeah, he's
that's interesting.
He wasn't the worst, but
there's not much history about Gerald Ford out there. He's very rarely even discussed. What has informed your opinion of him, Marty? Did you read a book, or were you just a careful observer back in the day?
I'm a huge Jimmy Carter fan, so I remember studying a lot about his predecessor, back in the day. And I remembered when George H.W. Bush was picking cabinet members, I was like, a lot of those people came right from the Gerald Ford cabinet.
Right.
Rumsfeld, Cheney, all those guys. They were all in the.
Was that in part because Jerry Ford couldn't carry over the Reagan people because so many of them went to prison or were under indictment, or was that because Jerry Ford had he was being funded by right-wing billionaires or whatever, and he, and they said, okay, here's your list, or why?
Yeah, I mean, I'll have to do more research, but I know that Reagan, I think they just kind of picked up where, after they won, I think that they were just kind of, keeping the same folks, from that same group.
Yeah, if I said Reagan, I meant Nixon. I'm sorry. I think I misspoke there. Yeah, a number of Nixon's people were indicted too. Yeah, I for just a second, ended up mixing up George Bush Sr. and Jerry Ford in my timeline in my brain here. But yeah, good point, Marty. Good point. Marty, thanks a lot for the call. Let's get one other vote in here. Wayne in Unity, New Hampshire. Hey, Wayne, your vote?
Yeah, my vote would be Trump. And no, excuse me, I mean Reagan. Mm-hmm. But I would like to make one caveat. I don't know what Trump's going to do yet.
Right.
Now, I don't remember when you lived in Vermont and New Hampshire, but I remember the demise of the total machine tool industry from Lebanon, New Hampshire, right down into Connecticut.
Oh, I watched it too. My dad was
all the union shops, everything were wiped out.
Yep. Yeah,
you remember that?
Oh, I remember it well. My dad worked for 40 years in a tool and die shop. I absolutely remember it.
I was a tool maker up in Claremont, New Hampshire at the time, and we had Jones and Lamson. We had Cone Automatic.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff.
We had
Wayne, I got to run. We're hitting a break here. Thank you for the call, and thanks for watching Free Speech. We'll be right back. So, worst president, I've said worst president ever. That's pretty broad territory. There's also worst president in my lifetime, worst president. Yeah, generally, worst president that we all remember and really know something about. How about that? Sam in Canton, North Carolina. Sam, your vote?
Donald J. Trump. He is the living embodiment of the worst of the aristocracy of old Europe. He was born into great privilege. He has abused that all of his life. He was given the most powerful office in the country. He is still abusive. He is still abusing the country. He is abusing the entire world. I honestly think he believes he is the king of America.
Yeah.
We need to get him out of office.
He certainly thinks that the agencies that the executive branch is responsible for, like the FBI and the Justice Department, are his as opposed to ours.
He thinks the whole country is his, and he just keeps running his mouth about things that he's not paying attention to. The intelligence people. He's not paying attention to the people that are running the government agencies. He's paying attention to a couple of people on Fox News and nothing more. He's the worst of the aristocracy. He doesn't care about anything but himself. He even threw his son under the bus a few months ago about the Russian meeting. I mean, he's terrible.
Yeah. Good case you're building there, Sam. Thanks a lot for listening to 880 in North Carolina, AM 880. Gary, listening to AM 950 in Minneapolis, KTNF. Hey, Gary, what's up? Your vote?
Yes, I'm here.
You're on the air.
Okay. I think that Trump is going to wind up being the worst president that we've ever had. He hasn't achieve that yet, but it's going to happen. But the thing is this has all been, laid out by what Reagan did. Not just Reagan, but the Republicans in general have allowed the situation to occur that provides the base for a rogue president to exist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we haven't seen anything yet.
At that level, at the level of president, we have been ignoring the rule of law ever since Jerry Ford pardoned Richard Nixon, I would say. And it's just gotten worse with each presidency, with the exception, Clinton got drawn back in. And frankly, I mean, having an affair, Bill Clinton was not the first president to have an affair in office. It was such a travesty.
Exactly. But the path has been pre-laid for Trump to become the rogue president of all time for this country, and we're in deep doo-doo.
Yeah. Well said. Gary, thank you. And thank you for cleaning that up for the radio. Paula in Seattle, listening to 91.3 FM in Seattle. Hey, Paula, who do you think was the worst president?
Oh, definitely Trump. And your callers have made so many good points, but he has set us back so far in race relations with his bigotry and his, the Ku Klux Klan, and bringing all that back up, which we keep trying to, put in our past.
And literal Nazis.
Pardon?
And literally Nazis.
Well, exactly. But the worst thing, and I couldn't list for an hour, so I don't know if anybody brought this up. The worst thing is how he treats and disrespects women.
Yes.
I mean, he has been just totally misogynistic, and he's pushing our country back into the dark ages. And that goes along with all the other things that everybody else has brought up. I mean, his contempt for the law and his, I think down deep he's an extremely unhappy man because he doesn't like anyone.
Yeah.
He's so dangerous to have where he is. But the thing, a person, a man by the way he treats women, by the way he treats his wife and his daughters and his mother and the women around him, and he is terribly disrespectful.
Yeah.
And I think it's just it's setting our country back, and we want to move forward. And I think that's what all of these marches are. We don't want to go back. We want to go forward.
Yeah.
And he's out of step, and we've got to get him out of there.
Well said. Well said, Paula. Thank you very much for your vote and your contribution to the show, the content that you just shared with us. Lee in Tamarack, Florida. Hey, Lee, your vote?
Yeah. Well, let me say the conversation about Truman was excellent. He was probably committed the two worst war crimes with the bomb dropping, and of course our current leader is he's a loose cannon. He's a loose cannon, and
he's jacking up the war in Afghanistan right now, real vigorously.
I know. But Ronnie, the refrigerator salesman, was the worst. Ronnie, refrigerator salesman, set the pace for the downward spiral of this country into what it's become, what the empire has become, and it's going to be the end of the empire soon, as many people have predicted. I have to put him down as the worst.
Are you calling him the refrigerator salesman because the GE Theater show was what made him famous?
Exactly. And when he said that the problem is government is the problem, you knew this man had no concept of what he was doing. He's the executive of the United States of America, and he doesn't understand that the government is responsible for serving the people.
Right.
He made it into an enemy.
Yeah. Well said. I just have 30 seconds left. I want to get Megan in here. Lee, thank you for the call. Megan in Jackson, New Jersey. You have a vote?
Yes. Oh, God, I'm so nervous. Definitely Trump, Pence, Reagan, and Bush. And I just want to say Reagan actually, with the war on drugs, they had kids while I was in school actually go child to child and have kids try to rat out their parents.
I remember that.
Yes, and they did it for years, almost 12 years of my life. And also they had us go underneath the desk. He completely destroyed generations, not to mention jobs. But Bush and Pence and /Trump. So I think they're all high competitors.
Okay.
And one more thing, can I say this real fast?
I'm sorry you can't, Megan. We're hitting the end. Okay, go for it.
Paul the Vulture Singer was the funder of the dossier.
Right, yeah. Greg Palast made that point earlier, and it was through the Washington Free Beacon. Yeah, you're spot on. Megan, thanks. Thanks so much for being with us today. Don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It requires you. Tag you're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Wines have some of the highest pesticide levels in our food chain. This hour brought to you by EcoWine.com. Pesticide-free wines, organic wines, imported from France by the Organic Wine Company, EcoWine.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com.